Welcome to the Boston Art Podcast,
Boston's premier art podcast,
where we talk art, culture, and philosophy.
My name is Theodore Earthworms.
And I am Brian Huntress.
Welcome to the show. All right.
The audio on the Cambodia episode was fine.
Good, so we can do it the same way this time. Are you excited? You wrote another script. You're banging them out.
I wrote another script. It's 2024.
Yeah, it's January 1st.
No, it's not. Well, it is in real life, but this episode's probably going to come out in like late January.
Oh, well.
So we hope your New Year's resolutions are going well. We hope you're going off and going hard, and we hope you're at the gym, and we hope your diet's going well, and that you're reading and writing every single day.
Or if you didn't do any of those things, it's okay.
Well, the joke is for all the people that decided to do all of those things and are definitely not doing them anymore.
Like us last year.
Yeah.
And us this year. So last year we decided we were going to go to the gym once a week every week, and we made it to
August.
You made it to August. I made it to June. We looked at our login portal on the thing.
Yeah, so now we're back on that.
Well, now we're on it, but we decided we're going to go 3 times a week. So that'll go better. Probably.
Yeah, we've increased the stakes and the requirements. I think I'm personally going for every other day. I'm going to try to not be as stringent with my rules, because last time it was Friday nights specifically. So if I was busy on a Friday, I just skipped it. Yeah.
But I think that if I make it that I have to go at least 3 times a week, that'll be better for building muscle anyway and getting in the habit. But if I do miss a day, I still have 2 more chances in the week. It's not like pushed off.
I also don't know if this is true or not, but I think that in the winter, it's better to go harder in the winter because you're more likely to atrophy or get out of shape when it's freezing cold out and you don't want to go outside and you're eating a lot and you're just in bed all day or something.
Yeah.
Like all of your free time is spent warm and hidden. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like that's, for me, when my workout and health and fitness life totally shit the bed.
Yeah.
In the summer, it's easier to stay healthy, I feel like, because it's just way less punishing to do something active.
Yeah.
Like going for a walk in the summer or skating or whatever is
That's
easy.
what I want to be doing in the summer.
Right. Yeah, it's easy. You're totally fine. You're feeling good. But in the winter,
payoff.
Yeah.
In the winter, the payoff is so high. It's like horrible trying to get myself out of the house and out of my warm little hiding bed.
Yeah.
And then when I do go to the gym, and even if usually I don't do that much at the gym, to be honest. I'm kind of a lazy gym girl. But if I stretch and walk around and move my body and sweat a little bit, whatever I'm doing, it's like doing a fucking line of serotonin. I'm just so much better off for doing it. Versus in the summertime, I feel like I'm getting enough exercise anyway because I want to go out and do stuff and it's not freezing out and whatever.
Speaking of doing lines, we have a new script today. And for this script, we are going to talk about stardom.
Stardom?
Fame. Methamphetamine. And dopamine and serotonin.
Nice. I don't know if
the
listener knows this or if we said it last episode, but what we've been doing recently with scripts is that whoever writes it doesn't tell the other person anything. This time I got one tiny hint, but I don't really know the gist of it. And I do know it's a 20-page script.
Yeah, it's about 12,500 words, and we're going to try to get through it faster than that. If we have to do a part 2, we will, even though I don't want to. But this is the script of Andy Warhol. Is he an evil, exploitative sadist, like we all know and talk about him as such, or is he a neurodivergent drug addict? Which was he? Because
both.
We're gonna get into the weeds here because Andy Warhol is discussed by art historians, museum people, and the like as being a fucking super genius, hyper intellectual, philosopher of our time. And I hope to make the case today that is a giant load of shit. And not in a way to discredit Andy Warhol, but actually as a way to defend him.
Nice.
So
that is an interesting topic. I like that.
So we're going to do a little bit of Andy Warhol apologism.
You're so funny.
Sorry to anybody. This episode is for all of the people who have a light understanding or a deep understanding of art history that hate Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
Of which there are many.
You know what's so awesome about this too? I feel like we've been meaning to get around to an episode similar to this. Like just an Andy Warhol episode.
Yeah.
For literally 3 years.
Yeah, and here's the thing. We don't want to bore you guys because we know that talking about Van Gogh or talking about whatever is really, really fucking uninteresting and it sucks. I love Van Gogh. I love his story. But it's just like nobody wants to click on an episode about Van Gogh or something like that. Or generic basic art history, which is why we're taking a different lens to it.
Yeah.
We're trying to talk about it in a different way.
I like recontextualizing oversaturated historical figures. I think that's cool.
All right, so
quick side note before we do that. Because we're not going to release an episode on the day of...
Day of what?
This week is our 3-year anniversary of the podcast.
It's our 3-year anniversary.
Unfortunately, our first episode came out the morning of January 6th.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's our anniversary date. It was literally hours before. We didn't know that would be a significant date.
Dude, I love the fact that we get to reflect on the podcast's birthday anniversary every single year at the same time as reflecting on the QAnon Capitol insurrection storming the Capitol. Like, it's so fucking funny that happened the same day.
Oh my God.
I love that, honestly.
Well, we probably recorded the episode when? Like the 1st or something?
I don't know, yeah.
And we just queued it for Friday, and we're like, that'll be good.
Everybody felt like that was the apocalypse, but that was just like...
a fucking crazy thing that happened.
It was just uncles across America going to prison. Like, it was removing them from the family dinner table and putting them in jail for good reason.
It was a cleansing, really.
See, that was the real Antifa liberal conspiracy, was everybody... was completely fucking sick of having their asshole uncles over for Christmas and Thanksgiving. So they're like, fuck it, let's host a fake staged crisis actor insurrection to get all those assholes out of the house next Christmas and Thanksgiving. And we'll have a peaceful time. We'll hang out with fucking Nana and the kids. And Uncle Ron will
be gone.
We'll be rotting in solitary confinement. Anyway.
3 years.
Happy 3 years, everybody. Anyway, so Andy Warhol was born in Pittsburgh as Andrew Warhola was his true name. Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why. A little bit of trivia. I guess I could just tell you now, but actually, no, I'll tell you later. Yeah, birthday, August 6th, 1928, a Leo.
Oh, me too.
To a family of Polish immigrants, they lived in a small apartment until Andy's father saved up $3,200 to buy their first family home.
Is the time that Andy Warhol was born public record?
I highly doubt it because it was in 1928. So
it might be on his
they were
birth
probably
certificate.
just relying on like random analog clocks like in the hospital. So like even if somebody did write it down, like how do you even know that analog clock was right?
Let me just do a quick
Because
research.
everyone knows astrology is based off of iPhone time only.
Yeah, duh.
So did you look up Andy Warhol birth time?
Yo, Andy Warhol Big 3. It's here. I have it.
All right. Please read that at the end as a special treat.
Wait,
You're getting away from my presentation.
It was 6:30 a.m. Birth time accuracy marked as good.
All right. Please, we'll do Andy Warhol's Big 3 at the end.
Okay.
Okay. You'll know his Big 3 by the end of this, regardless.
So you got to stay till the end.
Yeah. So that's a special treat for the listener. Yeah. Andy was known as a strange kid. He never, ever, ever roughhoused. He never played. He never ran. And he actually rarely ever spoke. He just was a nonverbal, silent child.
Okay.
His brother and his other neighbor kids saw him as a weird, quiet nerd who was scared of everything.
Oh.
He played no sports and he would not play outside, but he loved to draw.
Me too.
Also, Andy collected photos and magazine cutouts of celebrities. He was a mama's boy, and he was absolutely obsessed with Shirley Temple and would send her fan mail regularly.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder if any of that is public record. It probably is.
It absolutely. That's how I know.
Could you read it?
Probably, yeah. I mean, Andy Warhol's child fan mail. I think maybe...
That'd be such a sick thing to own.
I think fan mail to Shirley Temple from Andy Warhol is not, but what they do have is the Shirley Temple like fan club or whoever was responsible for her fan mail sent him back an autographed photo.
Oh.
So that exists as an autographed photo from Shirley Temple in air quotes. That was probably just from like someone that they paid to write autographs for the child actor of the 1930s.
The fan mail that he wrote probably wound up in the trash or something, but that would be so sick to own that. Just a letter that Andy Warhol wrote to Shirley Temple.
Yeah, that would probably cost you $80 billion zillion.
I would never be in the tax bracket to buy that item,
Right.
but...
But yeah, during this time, he took to his mother very, very closely. Famously, she would have Andy and his brother. She would have them do drawing contests where she would have them sit at the kitchen table and draw a little horse, or who can draw the best snowman, and the winner would get a chocolate Hershey's bar. And according to Andy's brother, he would win every single time.
That's kind of fucked up. Imagine if your mom was doing that and your brother was Andy Warhol.
Also, fun fact about Andy Warhol's brother, he was also an artist, and I think when he was in his 30s or 40s, had a meltdown and burned all of the art he ever made in his life.
That's so sad.
Yeah, he's not known for his art at all. I think Andy Warhol's brother was just a regular guy, I think.
Dude, I'll say it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Don't ever destroy your old art.
Make sure you point that at you when you talk too. Sorry. Yeah, don't destroy your old art. Good point, Theo.
You have to riff my bit. You have to riff my bit.
I'm riffing the bit. I'm riffing it. I'm chiefing the bit. I'm chiefing the bit. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. As he grew, Andy excelled at art and became even quieter. There's a story from one of his family parties where he wouldn't enter the room with all the guests, but instead would stand outside of the room and show everybody his drawings, like hold them into the room so they couldn't see him, but they could see the drawings.
That's so cute.
And he could show them the pictures that he made.
Okay.
Sadly, at age 6, Andy was diagnosed with some horrible illness that I don't understand what it is, but it was called Sydenham's chorea, and it was a neurological disease that left him bedridden for many, many months and gave him a permanently pale complexion and red blotches all over his skin and face.
Oh, wow.
After the illness, Andy became permanently averse to touch. They say this is... Andy Warhol famously hated when people touched him.
I wonder if it was, like, similar in any way to, like, fibromyalgia. Like, was it a pain thing?
Could have been. I don't know. The only good thing that came out of this was, like Frida Kahlo, he became completely sedentary and bedridden, but was drawing the entire time. So, not a lot of people know this, but Andy Warhol is considered a master draftsman. He had a kind of natural ability to draw faces and bodies and draw from life, and like any good kid good at drawing, this really impressed all of the family and old people in his life. So Andy was known as like a little child prodigy artist boy. Anywho, another cool thing about Andy Warhol's upbringing was he was Orthodox Catholic, and even though he wasn't religious at all, obviously his family brought him to church all the time. His local church in Pittsburgh was filled with Eastern maximalist style of painting. So it was like a salon style altar with paintings all over the place of saints and this and that. And a lot of people compare the art from his family's faith and his local church as actually being really, really similar to the art that he would go on to make.
Oh, that's cool.
Where he would do like these repetitive styles or like the portraits and giant grids and stuff that actually kind of look like weird Orthodox art.
That's neat. That makes sense. I mean, those are some of the first inspirations for people that grow up within a church is the artwork within a church.
Yeah. In 1936, Andy's dad dies from some kind of chemical poisoning he got from his job. The family left him laid out in the living room for almost a week as he was passing away. During that time, Andy stayed hidden under his bed upstairs, refusing to come out.
As he was passing away?
Yeah, like he was at death's door, and they just kept him in the living room. While he was dying. Andy's brother says he was too scared to see his dad, so he hid under the bed until his dad died. Andre Warhola was his dad's name, left behind a small nest egg of money with Andy's brother and mom for Andy to go to art school. And despite... you looked at me quickly. Despite Andy being strange, silent, Despite Andy being a strange, weird, like, odd little kid in an immigrant family, Andy's family loved him and believed in him and wanted him to go to art school, which he did.
Dun, dun, dun. Hey, you can slow down, by the way. Don't worry.
I'm having an anxiety attack!
You're reading too fast. It's hard to follow.
Okay, sorry. Feel free to stop me at any moment.
Okay.
Also, I do understand the beginning of this is a little bit boring, and it's going to get more interesting.
I find it interesting. I've never heard these things about Andy Warhol as a kid.
I mean, that's the thing. Andy Warhol, like, The thing that I really want to cut through is this reputation that he has of being a hyper superficial, uber rich New York guy.
Yeah.
He, you know, we'll trust me, we'll get into it.
He started out as just a little guy.
He was a weird little guy that was obsessed with actresses and singers, and Shirley Temple probably sang into a comb in his room, listening to a fucking gramophone.
I know we already talked about it, but the idea of a little kid just like standing in the hallway and putting their picture in a room of a party without entering the room is like so adorable to me.
Mm-hmm. I agree. The next few years were hard as Andy's mother was the primary breadwinner of two boys. Many nights they had to feed themselves. Andy's brother would cook for the two of them. Always present at their table were the affordable, reliable, and delicious cans of chicken noodle soup. Campbell's. It sounds kind of like a Disney, like beginning of like some magic story, you know, these like poor little children eating Campbell's soup.
Yeah.
Knowing what he would go on to paint. But just like any Disney movie, I was going to say, this is just like every Disney movie, except this story has a lot of heroin, suicide, and death. So it's not like a Disney movie at all. Anyway, Andy went off to college, Carnegie Mellon University, some kind of local technical school. During that time, he excelled at his drawing and developed his style, blah, blah, blah.
Wait, Carnegie Mellon?
He went to Carnegie Mellon University, which is like a college in Pittsburgh. I don't know anything about it.
Isn't that like a big deal? That's not a local technical school.
When he went there, apparently it was just a school to go to.
Oh, really?
I don't know. At the end of his first year, he was actually kicked out because he didn't complete any of his assignments and just did his own thing and his own art. But he recreated his entire portfolio at the end of the year in a desperate attempt to be reinstated, and so they did. After graduation, Andy decided to pack up and head to New York City. People close to Andy believe that college showed him a world outside of Pittsburgh, or at least showed him that the world was bigger than his hometown. Pittsburgh today is rich with culture and history, but back then, it was a post-war blue-collar town. The mountain mines and factories were no place for a young, gay, neurodivergent artist. And so his brother drove him to the bus station and gave him money. He went off to New York with his friend Philip Perlstein, who would go on to have an art career of his own. Not even close, obviously, to the fame that Andy Warhol would reach, but apparently Philip Perlstein, he has a Wikipedia page, so he did something.
I just Googled it, by the way, and I don't know about then, but Carnegie Mellon is now considered like better than Ivy League.
Wow.
It's a really big deal of a school.
You know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was just a fucking awesome school. But yeah, so Andy arrived in New York City, and within just a few weeks, he got a job as an illustrator at a fashion magazine. Stop peeking.
What?
You're reading ahead. No, you can look. Sorry. Did I make you upset?
No.
I love you. I'm sorry.
Me too.
I'm nervous. I'm nervous.
Do you want coffee?
No, the coffee's not helping. It's making me more stressed.
Do you want some tea?
No, absolutely not.
Do you want
That has milk in
some
it.
sandwich?
No. I love you. No, it's
Me
okay.
too.
But yeah, Andy got a job as an illustrator almost immediately after moving there.
That's cool.
He lived in a small apartment in Manhattan that apparently was filled with cockroaches and rats and was terrible, despite it being in Manhattan, one of the most expensive places in the universe. And also, Andy was known to have an odd and unkempt style of dressing and doing his hair, and he kept all of his art in brown paper bags during his presentations instead of the standard portfolio bag.
Brown paper bags.
Yeah, and one day on a memo or a check or something like that, his boss misspelled his name on some kind of internal document as Andy Warhol instead of Warhola, and Andy really liked it and decided to keep it.
That's funny.
Apparently that's how he got his name. And also he was very embarrassed of his immigrant status. Like at the time, like, I mean, maybe even still today, like it wasn't exactly cool to be like, you know, some like poor kid from Poland living in America. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it was like a very WASP-centered society. So,
Was he born in Poland? Did you say that already?
No, I think he was born in Pittsburgh.
What his parents were?
Yeah, his parents were Polish-speaking immigrants.
Interesting.
They learned English when they got here.
So was he bilingual?
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
But yeah, as far as Andy's bad style and odd reputation, he ended up earning the nickname Raggedy Andy, or Paper Bag Andy, because he dressed so strangely.
Raggedy Andy.
Yeah, but...
That sucks. It's kind of a sick nickname, but I'm sure it was not fun.
Yeah. But within a year or two of working in the illustration field, Andy became one of the most in-demand illustrators in New York City. He didn't pioneer it, but he popularized a kind of contour drawing style of people, similar to like Tumblr-y illustrations, like inky, sketchy, cool drawings of like fashionable people wearing cool clothes. You know, art directors and advertisers went crazy for this shit, so he made very, very good money and he stayed employed. So much so that he was eventually able to get his own apartment. The one that I mentioned in Manhattan had a bunch of roommates. Forgot to write that down.
Oh, okay.
So he lived with a bunch of roommates and was a young, budding professional, started making fat stacks and got his own spot.
Nice. Good for him. The dream.
It is the dream, certainly.
So we're on page 2 and he's already accomplished the dream.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just how the fucking world was back then, you know, in the 50s. Like, 40s and 50s, you could just...
You could hustle.
You could just walk into a place and say, hey, I'm a smart, cool guy, and I want a job.
Do you think that's really how it worked, though? Because why didn't everybody just do that?
Well, white guys did that.
Yeah.
Not everybody did that.
That's true.
You could do that if you were a cool white guy. It's like the Bo Burnham song, White Guy in 1985. Anyway.
That's so real, actually. I feel like I think about that history and I'm always like, damn, I wish I was able to do what I'm doing right now in like the 50s or 60s or 70s. And then I remember that I would be like lobotomized or something.
I mean, you could have been like Gertrude Stein or something, who was like a badass, like lesbian rich lady who collected art and was like a kingmaker in the fine art world.
Yeah.
Or but she was super fucking rich.
Rosemary Kennedy.
You could have been like Rosemary Kennedy, yeah.
You never know.
And get chopped up and die permanently disabled like 100 years later. After
she lived until 2005.
Yeah, exactly. That's very horribly depressing.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Off topic.
Should be an interesting episode in herself, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, Andy had some romantic connections, but not many. One former lover described him as being terrified of touch and avoidant. He believed himself to be grotesque. Andy did not really want to have sex, but instead just wanted to watch his sexual partners like a voyeur. It's a little weird and personal, but during this time, Andy also began to go bald. He bought a light brown wig that matched his old hair perfectly, but ended up ditching that and bought a weird-looking gray wig. The first of many of his iconic white-haired look. He even got a nose job because he didn't like his nose, and tried to have this procedure where they shave the red blotches off of his skin.
Oh.
Obviously, that did not work because that's not real, obviously.
Yeah, it's probably created more scarring.
And you had a question while I was writing this if Andy Warhol's wig was held on by buttons, and that is not true. Apparently, he famously just glued the wigs onto his head.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I kind of figured the button snaps thing was not true, but I've never looked into it because I kind of wanted it to be true.
What's funny about that is when I tried to research that, I couldn't find anything about that.
Oh my god, is that something that I just like made up in my head?
Yeah, Andy having button snap wig. I don't know what that is, and I couldn't find anything.
You know, like when you have a jacket where just like the metal clasps?
I get it, but I don't know if that was from something or I don't know.
Oh my god, did I just like invent that?
You made that up.
I was like convinced that was a thing. That like, I mean, I thought it wasn't real because it probably wouldn't be real, but I had heard as a child that he had like little metal button snaps installed in his head so you could snap a wig on.
I have a theory, by the way, about why some people or every single person accidentally believes like ludicrous things and then finds them out when they're an adult. You know how every child, when they're like two or three after they start talking, goes through the why thing?
Yeah. Like,
why is the sky blue? Why are my eyes white? Why blah, blah, you know what I mean? And then parents famously just make stuff up for fun. Yeah. That's got to be how this happens. Yeah. Like maybe because your mom was teaching you about art and stuff when you were a kid, you were like, how did he keep his wig on? Blah, blah, blah.
You know what's so funny about that too?
Your mom was just like, button snaps.
They never remember what they said either.
Yeah, they just lie on a whim while they're making a PB&J for you and you eat it.
And it's lost to time.
Yeah, and they're just like, oh, because he was an alien.
Oh, do you think that's one of those things? I mean, I kind of knew, obviously, like, I figured he probably wouldn't have button snaps on his head, but I was wondering where that myth came from, and maybe it was just my mom. Yeah. Damn.
But yeah, so as Andy was a young working professional making good money, way before his art really took off, he started wearing the creepy white wigs. Wow. And all of his friends and his boyfriends and people he hung out with thought that it was a disturbing and bad look. Really? Everybody was like, what are you doing? Wearing a creepy white costume wig.
What haters?
It was the 50s. Like, you gotta keep in mind, like, this is like Mad Men time. Like, you could not be gay. You could not be, like, you couldn't even be Jewish.
Yeah.
In this like universe. Like, they were just, it was the time. And so Andy dressing shittily and wearing a creepy wig and being some like weird loner that doesn't speak and is very blatantly gay made him have a reputation.
Some problems, probably.
Well, not just, what's interesting though is that he was really in demand.
Yeah.
Like, the clients wanted his art, and so they got it. So he was like he worked for some places, but I think he was like freelance and agency to agency working for people or whatever. Anyway, during this time, Andy really wanted to be a fine artist, not just a commercial artist. So he tried showing his art in galleries, but he was turned away everywhere he went. The style of the time was that of the New York school, with artists such as Jackson Pollock, Rothko, etc. These artists saw themselves as an alternative and refuge from commercialism and consumer culture. They saw it as like a societal sickness that was degenerate and effeminate, and they were men expressing themselves as highly in an intellectual, masculine, cool way, like writery and literary. And Andy obviously was the complete antithesis of this because he was visibly gay, strange, a commercial illustrator.
Yeah.
So he was everything that these guys like Jackson Pollock did not fuck with, you know, because those guys were like the beat poets and abstract expressionists. They weren't. It was not a time for gay artists.
Yeah.
It was a time to be a fucking tough guy that drinks and has sex and understands how he feels and the meaning of the world.
Yeah.
Like, it was like
grit, like tough guy,
grit.
like Bukowski-esque.
Yeah, it was a masculine movement. It was there were some obviously very popular women abstract expressionists, but they were the exception.
Yeah.
You know? So, and the abstract expressionists, of course, dominated the 40s and lasted well into the 50s.
Yeah.
Until the time period that we are actually here to discuss right now.
I was going to say this was concurrent with like Patti Smith's. Actually, she might have been 60s.
There are probably
I think she was
Andy Warhol photos of Patti Smith. I guarantee they knew each other. We'll talk about that because Andy was very, very. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we gotta pick up pace a little bit here. Do you know we're at half an hour?
I'm trying to pick up the pace. Okay.
No, you're doing a good job. There's a lot of info here.
But yeah, and keep in mind, most of Andy's work at this time were the sketchy, illustrative ink styles that he was doing.
Yeah.
But they were almost all of men kissing and having sex.
Oh, interesting.
So obviously, no gallery in their fucking right mind in the 50s was hanging his work. They were like, dude, are you fucking crazy? Like, we're not hanging up this gay shit of dudes sucking dicks and making out. Not to mention, representational art was not in. People did not want drawings of things.
It was abstraction.
Yes. And the only place that showed Andy's work was a small gallery called the Bodley Gallery and an ice cream shop directly next to it called the Serendipity that was a gay hookup spot. So it was an ice cream shop where gay guys hung out. So
it's kind of cool.
Yeah, so it was probably a really cool scene, but it was fringe and underground.
Yeah.
So
you don't want me peeking at your script? I was just curious.
Peeking.
I was curious.
I love you. I'm sorry.
Quick side note. I think it's really interesting that abstraction is pretty common in galleries around here right now too. But at the time, it was more of like an against the grain kind of like. It was cool because it was sort of unheard of, which is why it was trendy. And now it's kind of cool because it's a little bit less controversial, so it's easier to sell.
Right. Those guys were going up against neoclassicism and impressionism and like very, very deeply conservative, highly intellectual types of art. You know what I mean? Like they were going up against, like neoclassical meaning, to put it into normal terms, is Renaissance art being made by modern people.
Yeah.
So that's the type of thing that Jackson Pollock and Rothko were waving their fists at and rebelling against.
Yeah.
So, and they were anti-commercial. Like, this is a time where having a job and having money was whack. Like, oh, you care about money? Like, that money is the root of evil. The root of evil, man. You're just supporting the man with your job. Whatever. I don't fucking know. This is like beatnik, stupid anti-capitalist. Well, whatever. Not to be too disparaging of the movement, but
I think it's difficult to appreciate because now if you do that, you just like don't have a home.
yeah, now you're just homeless now. Great
Yeah.
job.
You could go like shine shoes or clean floors and have enough for your rent at that time. So you didn't like need to be
Right.
super pressed about it. Now you need like fucking $80,000 a year to like have food.
Dude, yeah, Andy Warhol's dad bought their family home for $3,000.
Yeah. So it's easy to laugh at that mentality, but you have to remember the context is different.
Money was different.
Different world.
Yeah. Also, during this time, Andy had a favorite author, a man named Truman Capote, who is mostly lost to history, but apparently was very notable at the time.
Oh, wow.
I don't know a lot about him other than the fact that Andy was obsessed with him, and Capote was something of a heartthrob. Like, there was, like, sexy, handsome pictures of him distributed in magazines and such. So Andy was in love with his work and in love with Truman Capote. So after moving to New York, Truman Capote's hometown, Andy began writing him letters, attempting to meet him regularly, fucking going to his apartment and leaving notes on his door. Andy was a proper parasocial stalker.
Wow.
So, and Capote did not reciprocate these social interactions at all. Eventually, Andy developed a whole series of illustrations based on the writings of Capote's work and displayed them in this big, magnificent gallery show.
What kind of author was Capote?
I think just fiction. I don't know.
Was he gay?
Probably. I have no idea. I don't know.
Just guessing.
I have no clue.
Interesting.
But yeah, Capote also knew that this was happening and was actively avoiding him.
Oh.
Andy, this guy
He was
did.
just literally stalking
This
him.
guy did not want to talk to Andy because Andy was just some like weird guy with a creepy wig following him around. So,
Do you wear wigs?
oh, I don't know. So, in this gallery show, mentioning based off of his work, was a massive flop. Barely anyone went, and nobody bought any pieces, and it was a massive failure and embarrassment to Andy.
Oh.
It was a massive fuck up. So,
Been there.
yeah. Right after this, Andy's mother paid him a surprise visit to New York City, saying that she had sold their family home in Pittsburgh and she needed a place to stay. She told Andy that she would live with him until he found a girlfriend. She would go on to live with Andy for the next 20 years.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
He became roommates with his mom. A rich gay bachelor living with his mom.
That sucks.
Yeah, he was a weird guy.
Why'd she sell her house?
She just wanted to be closer to Andy.
She didn't tell him in advance?
No, she didn't. She literally knocked on his door and informed him of all of this.
Was she trying to force him to get a girlfriend? Did she know he was gay?
Yeah. No, she obviously not. Anyway, we'll get into that. But she did not know that he was gay, allegedly. Maybe she did, and she didn't want him to be gay. I don't know. That's a good, interesting question. Blah, blah, blah. He initially loathed his mother crowding his New York City bachelor pad, but Mrs. Warhola made the place home by cooking, cleaning, and even helping Andy with his commercial illustrations, going as far as working behind the scenes as his personal colorist.
Wow.
She was credited on the album notes of a album called The Story of Moondog by a band named Moondog.
Wow.
I don't know anything about them.
So she sounds kind of chill, actually.
She was a nice mom that baked cookies and cleaned. So it was, despite Andy being like, oh, fuck, my mom's here, it ended up being a nice
He didn't have to cook dinner anymore.
Yeah, his mom
kinda
cooked
nice.
for him and took care of him.
Yeah.
Growing up a mama's boy, very close to his mom, and she took care of him and made him draw pictures.
That's kind of sweet.
This was a positive influence on him, probably.
20 years? That's interesting.
Yeah, we talk about the nuances of that later. Like, it makes sense later.
Okay.
Anyway, eventually Andy became legitimately affluent, even before his fine art career took off. After becoming the most sought-after commercial artist in the city, he purchased a 3-story townhouse, giving his mother the entire basement apartment and moving himself upstairs, decorating the whole 2 floors with an array of fine art paintings and prints, including original works by Picasso, Magritte, and the like.
Wow.
So before Andy was even famous or anything, he literally owned Picassos.
Yeah. And a fucking New York townhouse.
And he owned a 3-story townhouse.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was a different time.
On his drawings.
Yeah, on his drawings. One thing you have to understand if you're going to understand Andy is the cultural setting he was in. To us, in 2024, or even in the 2000s, 90s, or 80s, a weird gay artist trying to get famous is a completely normal, run-of-the-mill story. Between the two of us, we probably know at least 1,000 weird gay artists trying to get famous.
Yeah, that's what we do.
It's just the world we're in. But for Andy, this was not normal. This was a guy whose family left Eastern Europe to come to America in total poverty in the 1920s. A guy who grew up in an extremely poor immigrant neighborhood in Great Depression Pittsburgh. A guy who had autism before autism was invented. So it's highly speculated that he had autism, even though that wasn't really a diagnosis you could get at the time. Of course, there were countless gay people, and I'm not equating Andy to some kind of civil rights activist or something, but this man is one of the OG toxic gay icons that would kill to become famous. And for that, we must recognize him. Because that's everybody. But he was one of the first ones.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to note about him. Anyway. The guy's like an
OG
American Horror
toxic
Story
gay
character.
icons. Yeah.
Like, this is someone that Ryan Murphy would write, which he did, because in Hotel, I believe it is, the American Horror Story season Hotel, they actually have a weird side plot about Andy Warhol, where he is played by Evan Peterson, or whatever the fuck his name is.
Evan Peters played Andy Warhol?
Yeah, it was like a one-episode bit that they did in one season.
That's weird.
Yeah, so, and as far as the time period goes, Andy was a young professional in 1950s corporate America. He could have been fired for being gay. You know, he made his way as a self-starter in 1950s New York, bided his time, and like many Americas of the era, saw a massive metaphysical change on the horizon as the 1950s emerged, the 1960s emerged, and the 1950s were laid to rest. Andy would repeatedly tell his friends, there's going to be a new movement and a new kind of person, and you could be that person.
That's inspiring.
They always say that time changes things, but you actually have to change them yourself.
I feel like if someone said that to me, I could be convinced to do anything. I'd be like, shit, yeah, I am that person.
Yeah. So, blah, blah, blah.
Hey, side note, but my hair looks really good right now.
Your hair looks beautiful.
The lighting is
So the way that your hair is colored, the auburn kind of light brown hair that you have now, it's the type of color that absorbs light. And when there's light put on it, it illuminates, you know? Versus something like black hair just kind of eats color or eats light. Your hair is lit up by the sun.
I love you.
I love you too. I forget whose quote this is, but it's somebody that said, real paradigm shifts in the art world completely redo it. Just as the world of abstract expressionists destroyed all of the previous galleries and they destroyed the previous dealers and marginalized all the culture as it existed and put themselves in power, so did the world of pop art and minimalism. It did the same thing. It wasn't just new artists and new dealers. I mean, it wasn't just new artists. It was new dealers, new collectors, and new everything. So, yeah, we're getting to a different point. So the 1960s were coming, and they were going to be absolutely fucking mental. It kind of reminds me of Mad Men. We begin very sterile, uptight, and conservative in the 1950s and begin the reinvention of America in the 1960s.
A big cultural shift.
A big...
The United States.
Oh, yeah. And the story of Andy Warhol is just kind of is kind of an allegory for that change, because his career, the most legendary years of his life was this decade. So, the first whispers of the 1960s pop art movement came from two artists named Jasper Johnson and Robert Rauschenberg, who are very well known today, but they're kind of a little more niche. They're not exactly popular pop art right now. But these two guys were friends, and they were also lovers. They both had one-man shows, one after another, at a popular gallery in New York City. These works featured things like drawings from newspapers, still life paintings of everyday objects, and sculptures resembling everyday objects, one such being a sculpture of brushes in a paint can. So this is the kind of thing that you'd see at a gallery right now.
Yeah.
It's pop art.
Which is very cutting edge at the time.
Right. This was fucking crazy at the time. Weirdly, Rauschenberg and Johnson would have nothing to do with Andy because of his close association with commercial art and his queerness. Both Johnson and Rauschenberg were former commercial artists and were also both gay, but they were in the closet and heavily associated with counterculture and anti-commercialism. It threatened their security and careers to associate with Andy, someone who is well known to be gay and the most well-known commercial artist in the city.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Andy lamented to a close friend about his ostracizing, saying, "Why won't they see me? Why can't I be a painter?" To which his friend replied, "Because you're a commercial artist and because you're too swish and campy."
Damn.
And
Too
then
swish and campy.
yeah, kind of funny. Andy then decided he just wasn't going to care because those things were things he wasn't willing to change.
Yeah, good.
Andy's first big splash was in 1961. He set to work on what would now be known as some of the first major pop art paintings. It was a series of paintings featuring magazine pictures, comic book text, and the like. Some say he chose the same exact type of vibe as Rauschenberg and Johnson, but used subject matter more compelling and cutting, such as bold use of text in painting, paintings of advertisements for nose jobs and advertisements for wigs. It's almost as if Andy used his commercial advertising abilities to communicate with the masses. Not to communicate with the masses, but to communicate with people like him. So he's talking to weird gay people with his commercial art skills. These pieces were very avant-garde, expressive and messy with paint splatters and drips. And they were very, they're very expressive and cool. And it was just like the work he's most known for right now, but painterly. That's the only difference. He would use a projector to project images of magazines onto big canvases and then trace them with a pencil before filling them in with paint, much like a lot of work that you see right now.
Can we quickly define painterly?
Painterly being you can see the brushstrokes. You can see that it's a painting. Andy's Warhol's work is famous for you not being able to tell that it's a painting.
Yeah.
It's like flat. It looks like somebody made it with a printer.
Yeah.
But this early era of pop art was painterly.
It was like brushy and
brushy and cool and whatever.
That makes sense.
But yeah, Andy's initial body of work was everything the abstract expressionist movement wasn't. It was materialistic, it celebrated consumerism and maximalism, and it was very, very gay. So.
Fuck yeah.
It was kind of interesting. He was really fucking cool in the beginning. That's just the truth.
It's crazy because I feel like art now, I mean, generalization obviously, but I think that is very on brand and on the pulse for the current moment.
Yeah. And for all of the people listening right now that are mad at me and you're like, Warhol's a terrible exploitative person, you wait, we'll get to that. Okay? Trust me, he's not off the hook yet.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to that stuff real soon. Anywho. Warhol kept his day job during this time, but continued to show his work in galleries, one actually being a staff art showcase in the window of a department store that he painted signs for. Oh. Yeah, kind of funny, huh?
Trader Joe's.
Even Andy Warhol did staff art shows at his job. So let that inspire you, people listening.
Also, I don't know what department store that was. That's kind of cool. They did a staff art show. What the hell? Imagine a Macy's art show.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it was a very different time because the people who have the job that we're talking about right now are people who do Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, like people who make this is the graphic artist's life.
Yeah.
Commercial artist in the 1950s means graphic designer right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, or whatever,
Digital.
or like copy maker, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Okay. After working in silence for nearly a year, Andy eventually met two men that would change everything. One was a snappy, glib salesman type guy named Ivan Karp, who was assistant to a notable art dealer named Leo Castelli, Leo Castelli is like quintessential with 1960s pop art in New York City. He was the guy. And a man named Henry Geldzahler, who was a 29-year-old curator at the Met, who would go on to be known as the biggest industry champion of pop art.
That's crazy. I've never heard of him before.
And Henry Geldzahler, yeah. He was the guy, and he ended up becoming permanently fascinated with Andy Warhol. He fucking loved Andy and had his fingers in literally everything that Andy did for a long time. The snappy assistant guy, Ivan Karp, said, when I saw Warhol, Lichtenstein, Oldenburg, and Wesselmann within a 4-month period, I had a sitting up in bed kind of feeling, thinking something very strange was going on in the art world. Karp and Geldzahler were convinced that there was something supernatural and powerful about Andy. Karp tried to bring Andy into his employer's roster, but Castelli, the famous gallerist, did not want anything to do with Andy and thought that he was kind of whack. Did not see what these two young professionals saw.
I think that's important to know too, just in terms of like contemporary curation. like we talked a little bit about doing independent curatorial stuff or like collaborating with other artists, and I think it's so easy to get swept up in the current of like a lot of people like this person, or this person has a lot of followers or a lot of friends, which means that they're good. And just I think it's very important to remember to follow your own voice in terms of identifying people that could be good collaborators or that you would want to work with, because that is not a direct equivalency. Like a lot of the time, the people that are doing things that are really experimental and interesting are not going to be liked during the active portion of their career, which applies right now to people you know. So keep that in mind.
Good point. The first big transformation was his first body of work featuring paintings of Coke bottles with no drips, no obvious brush marks, and no abstraction at all. Andy was uncertain about this, but he invited a group of friends over to his studio to check them out, including Ivan Karp, Geldzoller, Emile D'Antonio, and LA gallerist Irving Bloom. So Andy's got some fancy friends now. Because he's rich and because he's the most sought-after commercial artist in the city, obviously he's got some connections, even though he's not in demand as a fine artist at all. So he showed them the messy versions of the Coke bottles because he made 2 series. He made Coke bottles in his normal style where they're sketchy and cool and drippy. And then he made some that were completely pristine with no brush marks that hid the hand of the painter. And everybody in the room absolutely were blown away by the ones that weren't painterly at all.
Yeah.
That looked like they were made by a printer. One man, Emile, is quoted as saying, "It's naked, it's brutal, it's who we are." This was a huge deal because these pieces looked just like his commercial art and nothing like what he thought fine art was supposed to be. So that changed everything for Andy.
That's really interesting too, to consider like making 2 different series where the only difference is texture.
Yeah, it is.
It's very small detail to think about. Like, I feel like that's something that usually when I think about that, it's because I'm looking at 2 different pieces that already exist and comparing them in my head of like trying to figure out what makes them different. But I don't usually make work and then remake it with an alternative style. That's an interesting exercise.
It is. And keep in mind, you got to remember this about the pop art movement, about Andy as well, is he was not the only person making art with commercial images. He was not the only person painting comics. He was not the only person using text in his art. This was a big, growing group of new artists doing all the same things, but it was different people doing the same thing differently.
Yeah.
And the way Andy was doing it, and the flavor, and the context, and the nuance, that is what set him apart.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how if you're a pop punk band, you're obviously not the only pop punk band.
But you might be doing it better.
You might be doing it differently.
Yeah.
So Andy was doing pop art differently. By 1962, the paintings became increasingly non-painterly, almost like they weren't even made by a person. He completely abandoned the idea of shading, value, and space, and only allowed hue, line, and text to dominate the compositions, which is distinctly opposite of what even us today think of as good art. Most audiences in the gallery world hated Andy's new work. Taking inspiration from the likes of Johnson and Rauschenberg, Andy exhibited from his old body of work a bunch of paintings of popular comic book characters and cartoons, and it was a fucking massive failure. So even though Andy had these Coke bottles cooking on the back burner in a studio, he just, distributed these kind of comic, messy, cool paintings that he was doing for magazines and stuff, and they flopped.
Which is interesting, because wasn't he a contemporary of Roy Lichtenstein, who was doing the same thing?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Lichtenstein in a second, actually. But
oh, great, okay.
One art dealer from this gallery show said this, Warhol himself looks like something that had crawled out from under a rock. He was the most colossal creep I had ever seen in my life. Despite his powerful friends and efforts, New York City hated Andy, and his cartoon paintings were a massive flop.
Imagine being described that way.
As a colossal creep that crawled out from under a rock.
I think I'd kill myself if someone said that about me.
Yeah, well.
On public record? Who was he talking to?
I think he was
like a
talking,
reporter?
Probably a documentarian or something.
I would literally die.
Yeah. Yeah, and even today, these people's opinions persist. Many believe that Andy's flat, repetitive style robs art of what art is supposed to be. Andy's work blocks the viewer from spiritually connecting with it. It is so unbelievably commercial and emotionally opaque that it repelled the audience at first glance. People saw this approach as a kind of blasphemy. It's important to note that Andy was most hated by his contemporaries, other artists and art professionals. Even Irving Bloom, the LA gallerist, a man fully on Andy's team and supporting him, did not understand what Andy was doing. His new approach was baffling. By 1961, Andy's contemporaries in the pop art movement reached great success, but Andy was still in obscurity. Eventually, he decided to abandon the cartoon paintings and turn to his close friends for advice. This time, he asked his homies what to do. His friend, Liberta Latow, who I think is an arts journalist and writer of the time, said, "You like money. You should paint pictures of money. You should paint something that people see every day, that everybody recognizes, like a can of soup." The next morning, I didn't write about this, but Andy also did a massive series of paintings that were just paintings of bills, of like $100 bills, $50 bill, $20.
He literally followed her advice then.
Yes, so that's another thing we're going to touch on as well, is the way Andy got his ideas, so, which is controversial.
Very controversial.
So the next morning, Andy had one of his friends head over to the A&P, as it were, and buy him a can of every single type of soup that they had. He spent the day experimenting with a variety of styles and compositions before landing on his final take, 32 single still life paintings of a single can of soup, each of them depicting a different type of soup.
He didn't even go buy his own soups?
He didn't buy his own soups. He had his homie head to the store for him.
I guess that's fine.
Okay, well, you know. He worked on the subject for months and months. Through this approach, we are reminded of Andy's Catholic upbringing and the very concept of a ready-made art, a found object or a still life painting for the most famous and revered examples of which is the transubstantiation of the body and blood of Christ.
Holy shit.
I mean,
pause for that take.
Well, think about that.
The body and blood is ready-made art.
The ready-made art, the still life painting, and the found object come from the Catholic faith. That's what transubstantiation is. It's taking a cracker or the bottle of wine and us spiritually agreeing that this is the body and blood of Christ and letting it affect us. So, it's the same as the painting of an icon or a sculpture or a cross necklace or a shrine. Religion points at the objects and demands us to see them in a new transcendent way, just as the artist points at an object, and to some degree it becomes art. Despite, it's like there's like this famous quote as well that's poetry is a finger pointing at the moon. This is because art lives in our perception, not just in the reality of the object we are looking at.
I feel like we could have an entire debate about that statement. That's interesting.
Well, I mean, the debate would have to be predicated on the idea that there's a right answer.
Yeah.
Which there really isn't. Because, I mean, there's some people that feel like their version of art has to be a fully manipulated and rendered picture. And there's some people that accept conceptual art. And both of those people are fine.
Yeah.
So, eventually Andy hosted his friend and LA art dealer Irving Bloom in his apartment, where he showed him the Campbell Soup paintings. Baffled by the pieces, Bloom inquired about Andy's past cartoon paintings. Andy abandoned the idea after the massive failure and seeing the rise in popularity of Lichtenstein and his massive success with his comic paintings. So Andy was like, yeah, I'm not going to...
already doing that.
Yeah, Lichtenstein is blazing his own path, as it were, with the cartoon paintings. So Bloom invited Andy to show these works at his gallery in California. Obviously, Andy agreed. So, did you have a comment?
Do you need to take a quick break?
Do I? Do you?
No.
I don't? No.
You don't?
Why? What the hell's wrong with you? Do you think...
I don't know. Do you have to pee?
I do have to pee, actually,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, it's just
How did you know?
Because
You can tell that I have to pee?
I can tell.
I'll pee in a minute. It's okay. I love you.
I love you too. I didn't want to say it while we were recording.
How'd you know? Yeah, I really, really do. That's how you can tell we've been dating for a long time. You know that I have to pee.
I can explain it to you, but I don't know if you want me to read you.
Why? I'm doing a pee dance like I'm a kid or something?
You are, actually.
Great. This is very embarrassing. Awesome. But yeah, the soup cans obviously were a big success for Andy. That same year, before the LA show happened, Time magazine ran a story ridiculing the pop art movement and its artist, featuring a photo of Andy in his studio holding a can of chicken noodle soup. Andy's star was rising. He went through a myriad of interesting new ideas, including paintings of postage stamps, stenciled paintings, and even paintings of postage labels. Calling on his commercial art background once again, Andy began sending out his paintings to be professionally silkscreened and reproduced. Not for commercial distribution in stores or anything like that, but because he wanted to emphasize and explore his love of repetition. And keep in mind, Andy, at this time, was not reproducing photographs. He was using source material in life, like prints or a found object, and creating hand-drawn copies of them, and then sending them off to a silkscreen maker who would go and make a big-ass screen. Eventually, as technology advanced, Andy, a photographer, started to skip the drawing step entirely and just get his photographs silkscreened. So, even still, these were handmade objects. This was the beginning of an eternal marriage between photography and fine art. People have been coloring photographs, as we discussed on a previous episode, since the 1800s. But never did this cycle of photo, print, paint, print exist before. So, in 2024, we have... Did that make no sense? I'm saying this idea that somebody would be printing a photo, painting it, reprinting it, drawing on it, and manipulating a photo on a giant canvas in the context of fine art was pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah.
So...
And the technology just wasn't there before this period.
The technology began to be there during this period.
Yeah.
This was when people, like... Because before, it was about enlarging drawings and then making screens out of them. But this was around the time where it became easier to enlarge photos and make screens out of them.
Yeah.
I don't understand. This is something we would have to talk about the history of printmaking with somebody to understand this fully. But those are that is the reality of this presentation. So in 2024, me and you we have no problem just drawing from some random photo, or digitally manipulating images, or even tracing and painting on top of a tracing, or for that matter, using popular images in our art, images that we did not create. Andy was the first person to popularize this method to this degree in this context. Some say he ripped off other people's images, but who among us in 2024 doesn't do something similar? So...
It depends. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get into it, but...
A little bit.
I think to say that it's ripping off just because you're using source material that already existed is maybe overzealous, but it depends exactly which offense you're referring to when it comes to Andy Warhol.
It's true. I mean, of which we'll get into some of those,
He's innocent so far.
He's kind of innocent so far. There are great artists who paint scenes they saw in real life, paint people they saw or they know, historical figures, characters they love, athletes, people, places, whatever. Even Lichtenstein and the first pop artists copied popular images they saw in magazines. It was Warhol who took that to the next level, the level we are at right now. In 1962, the Soup Can Painting Show finally happened in West Hollywood. It went well, but the critics were disinterested and the paintings did not sell. A local gallerist made fun of the show by stocking his own gallery with windows with real Campbell's soup cans and a sign that said, "Buy them more cheaply here." I think he needed a little bit of a crash course on sign making. Bloom said that the people were either mystified or dismissive. People took them seriously because of Irving Bloom's reputation as a gallerist rather than Andy's reputation as an artist.
That's interesting.
Geldzahler, the Met curator, wrote, "The soup cans became the rallying cry for the sympathetic and the bane of the hostile."
The rallying cry for the sympathetic and the bane of the hostile.
Meaning that people that love Andy pointed to the soup cans and said, "See, this is why I love him." And people that hated him pointed at them and said, "See, this is why I hate them. I hate this guy."
I also think it's interesting to consider that people were taking it seriously because of Bloom, not because of Andy.
Yeah.
Because I think that is so real and carries through today that sometimes the context in which you're viewing an artwork transcends what you're even looking at.
Yeah.
Which is good to keep in mind because it's positive and negative depending on what you're looking at.
Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. Most critics did not care about the soup cans and thought Andy was a comical blip. But John Copeland's, the founder of a new art journal you may now know today as Art Forum, praised them as the greatest breakthrough since the ready-mades of Marcel Duchamp.
Yeah.
With his famous work, The Fountain. Isn't that fucking crazy that the founder of Art Forum, like one of the first publications, was writing about Andy Warhol?
Yeah.
Anyway, Irving Bloom, after being the first curator to take a chance on the soup paintings, became so attached to the works that he bought them all. He vowed to never separate the 32 pieces from each other and vowed that they would one day belong to a great museum. Bloom bought the 32 paintings for a total of $1,000. Bloom would go on to sell the group to the MoMA for $15 million.
Wow.
They are still intact as a group of 32 today.
I wonder if they ever put them on loan individually.
I think actually that's a stipulation of the series of 32 that they have to be displayed as a series of 32. The reason you see individual soup cans displayed is because he also made a shitload of singles.
Oh, I see.
The original 32 that were displayed as his debut, those are one piece.
Are those on view at the MoMA?
They might not be on view, but they're owned by the MoMA. Who knows if they're in the gallery or not, or if they're in storage, but they are the ones that possess them.
Interesting.
And I'm sure they travel them around, but I think that the thing is if they do travel them, it's as they're a group of 32.
Wow.
So, yeah, and it was this show and the soup cans that caused proper national interest in Andy's, not just Andy's work, but Andy, the celebrity. Yes. Like many artists of then and today, Andy was obsessed with I spelled that with an A. Wow. With fame and stardom. Over the next, it looks like I wrote abscessed.
You did.
Like have
that
an
must have been
abscess.
autocorrect.
Yeah. Over the next 18 months, Andy would become Andy would come upon the subject matter that would define his career forever. People believe the early 1960s were the first moments of the American celebrity culture. Marilyn Monroe, Elvis, and the like. Andy, with his massive artistic success, began to relate and become one with these people. In his infinite quest for greatness and celebrity, Andy began to examine the idea of stardom. America was once enamored by the everyday slice-of-life paintings of the likes of Norman Rockwell and such that showed us the beauty of everyday Americans. By 1962, Andy ushered in the love and fixation on presidents, movie stars, and heroes with paintings of celebrities. So, before, we were focusing on America, Americana, the real people, farmers, teachers, this and that, students.
Wasn't Rockwell, was he a Great Depression artist?
I think he's older than Warhol. So I think, actually, definitely, yeah. He's probably born in 1900, 1910s or something, and probably died in the 50s or 60s, is my guess.
I feel like that makes sense in terms of, like, the progression of American values, that this was the beginning. Like, what is this? We're in the mid-60s?
62.
Okay. So I think we're progressing towards the, like, hyper-capitalist, like, celebrity stardom era of the U.S. that I think a lot of us associate with, like, the 80s.
Oh, hell yeah. Yes, we do.
It's on its way up.
Yeah, and just as the soup can show closed in 1962, news broke across the country that famed star and actress Marilyn Monroe had committed suicide in her home just 3 miles away from Bloom's gallery. Oh. At the suggestion of curator Henry Geldzaler, Andy decided that Marilyn's face would be the subject of his next silk screen series. Wow,
I didn't know it was after she died.
Yeah, you got to keep in mind, Andy was a lonely gay guy that loved singers and actresses in Shirley Temple. So this guy probably had pictures of Marilyn Monroe in his fucking bedroom. He loved celebrities.
Yeah.
Historians say that Andy had little to no imagination, and Geldzaler knew that. Andy would always say that he was tabula rasa, which I have no fucking idea what that means, but it's a Wikipedia page for this, like, mystical thing, or like some type of legend or story or something, where the tabula rasa is a box that's empty, permanently empty, and you have to put things in it, or I don't know. But what he meant by that was that Andy felt like he was an empty vessel that needed filling. He would always solicit and take suggestions, and Henry Geldzaler saw that and gave him ideas all the time. At this suggestion, Andy started the Marilyn paintings the very same day that she died. So apparently Andy said that to people. He said, I don't have ideas. I don't make stuff. I don't make stuff up. I don't know. He just, like, he wanted his people around him to tell him to do things.
He was a synthesizer.
He was a synthesizer. I mean, similar to Elton John. Elton John famously doesn't write lyrics. He works with writers and songwriters.
That's so interesting, because I feel like that is one of the many criticisms of Andy Warhol that I hear most commonly, is that like he didn't make his own shit. He stole ideas from other people and whatever. And I'm sure we'll get into the.
He might have done that too. He got ideas fair and square from people who said, "Hey, Andy, you should paint this," and he's also alleged to have stole ideas from other people.
Yeah.
Andy used a new technique for this particular series where he painted the shape of Marilyn in bright, bold colors on a canvas and then silk screened the image of Marilyn on top of the canvas. So
a combination of like painterly and clean
yeah.
pictures.
The strange flat look comes... Oh. God damn it. I kind of fucking clipped off the top of this page. Whatever. But it had a strange flat look that was colorful and painterly. But because of the silkscreen nature, it had the actual photographic resemblance of Marilyn. Mm. It's a kind of early example of a graffiti fill technique where you put the color down first and then you put the black line around it.
Yeah.
Also, just... I'm not suggesting that Andy came up with that graffiti technique either. Anyway, the most magnificent of these... Oh, Andy would go on to make 23 of these paintings, the most magnificent being a massive diptych featuring 100 of the Marilyn faces, one side in full color and the other side in black and white, a theme that he would go on to explore much more in the future. This piece was about 12 feet wide. Many interpret the Marilyn paintings as not just being a portrait of her, but a portrait of the viewer. The Marilyn paintings come in hundreds of color combinations, all of the lines and marks just slightly different than the last. It unifies us in our collective desire to possess Marilyn, the object of our interest, but highlights our need to have her in our way. We individuate ourselves in our desire to possess her. Andy also painted Elizabeth Taylor as she fell ill and her career fell apart. Famously, I don't know a lot about her. You
auto-corrected talked.
I'm so stupid.
What? What's wrong?
No, I'm just shittily typed and edited.
That's okay. You can still read it.
Oh, while all society talked shit and criticized and stalked and spied on the private affairs of these celebrities, Andy dramatized them, humanized them, and loved them through these portraits. He was one of the first artists people feel to see these celebrities as people that he related to. Andy loved stars and he loved pop culture. He considered himself a camera, a mirror pointed at America.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So he had a more like capitalistic bent on reflecting American culture back to the viewer. So he was kind of doing something very similar to what Rockwell was doing, but in a different era.
But with famous people and celebrities.
Well, that's what people wanted to see at that time. I feel like in 1940s, like post Great Depression, World War II America, the America that we wanted to project out to others and to ourselves, a very like nationalistic American pride, apple pie kind of thing, which is what Rockwell was doing, which is probably why people ate that shit up or why it sold well anyway. But that wasn't 50s, 60s America so much.
Yeah, because there were even artists in the 1800s that were very affluent and rich and serving the affluent and rich that said, hey, why don't we care about the poor people? Why not the everyday people? Let's paint everyday people. Oh, look at them. We should give money to them. We should be... But Andy showed up and was like, fuck that. I like famous people. I like rich shit. I like sexy stuff. I like hot guys and celebrities and money, which is what we are right now.
But not even just that. I feel like the soup can paintings were, because that was something that he, like you said, that his mom used to feed him Campbell's soup, that was like nostalgic and part of his childhood, but it still has a consumerist bent that appeals to the average person.
Yeah. I have to pee so bad. It's
I know.
Really fucking
I've been waiting for you to do
sorry.
it. It's okay.
All right. Well, what time are we at?
We're at 1 hour and 10.
Holy shit, this is going so slow. All right, pause.
It's okay.
Fuck it.
And we're back.
Man, I really just can't function when I have to pee.
I know. That's why I was like, do you want to take a break? But we were at a really good part, so I get it.
Where were we? Let's see if we can
Can you hear how much more like slow you're thinking now?
Yeah. Anyway, I guess we'll get right back into it because this is going to be a long motherfucking episode, dude. Maybe I shouldn't have made this so long.
It's interesting. You're really getting into it.
Should I have to slim this down?
You're so funny. I love how you're like, yeah, school wasn't for me. I don't know. I don't think I would do college. And you're just writing like fucking 30-page like research papers fully cited for no reason.
I'm a failure.
No, you're not.
Anyway, by the end of the year, the first pop art show happened at a place called the Janus Gallery, and Warhol himself had his first one-man show in New York City. This New York show was his first massive, popular breakthrough. Everybody and their mother wanted to be at this opening, and it was packed. It rocketed him into success and made him the face of the pop art movement. Critics, dealers, and curators that doubted Andy were even present, such as Leo Castelli. They knew they were wrong about Andy.
So the first pop art show happened at 1963?
Well, it wasn't the first pop art show, but it wasn't actually, but it was Andy's first one-man show in New York City.
Oh,
and
he was
erroneously,
the same show? It was the same show?
Yeah, this was him. Oh, maybe I worded that shittily.
The first pop art show happened in Janus Gallery, which was Andy's first one-man show?
Oh, wait, no. Oh, my God. We're going to delete this whole episode. We need to restart. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, never mind. Just forget I said any of that. Okay? I don't know. I don't know
It's fine. I think that it looks like what you wrote was that...
Oh, no, I think there was a big pop art show at the Janus Gallery. Simultaneously, Andy had his first one-man show in New York City.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, but
he wasn't in the Janus Gallery show.
I think that he was.
Oh.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Stop pointing out my inconsistency.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Pop art is hot now, is what we're saying.
And Andy Warhol is the face of it. He didn't start it. He didn't invent it. But he's the fucking guy now.
Yeah.
Even whether it's fair or not. Critics said that Andy's new work was the first American break from European ideals, which they said the exact same fucking thing about abstract expressionism, but okay. And that his paintings were as sentimental as a Ford coming off of the assembly line, which people loved. Andy captured the consumer culture, the materialistic love of objects, and the fame that we live in today. Andy was not a product of American commercialism. He was the first one who made it into art. Of course, we can read into this that Andy was this great philosopher or whatever, but we can also see in his works that the young boy that loved art... We can also see the young boy that loved art and celebrities and wanted to be a star in New York City. So this is an interesting turning point, or a thing that defined Andy was... Like, it was considered wrong and immoral and stupid to love celebrities. This idea, like how people make fun of girls that watch the Kardashians.
Yeah.
Or love Taylor, or like paying $3,000 to see the Everest tour. This was the thing that Andy loved and was making art about.
Yeah.
Was that love of celebrity and things and money and people. So...
It's interesting, too, because it's sort of a chicken or the egg situation when people are like, Andy Warhol was such a genius, like, he made commercialism fine art. Was that the case, or was he a product of a commercialist, like, capitalistic society and just painted what he was interested in?
I think it's that, because every like gay guy that wears wigs and makeup and dances or does drag or wants to be a singer, like... Everybody loves the things that he loves and is talking about. Like, he's not the first one to love celebrities and singers and actresses and want to be a star.
Yeah.
Everybody's always wanted that.
Yeah.
But he was never in the closet. He was never pretending to be this smart, masculine, literary guy. He was never trying to be anything.
Yeah.
He was just some weird gay guy that loved the things he loved. And made shit about it.
It's interesting, too, because I know, like, the examples that you just listed, I don't know if this is maybe a hard and fast rule, but in my observation, I feel like the idea of, like, obsessing over celebrities, especially celebrity women like Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor, it's considered, like, sort of a effeminate trait. Like, being a girl that loves the Kardashians, Taylor Swift, blah, blah, blah. Like, this obsession with celebrity and with concurrently beauty and fame and wealth. Like, I mean, there's a hyper-masculine way to do that now, too, with, like, Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, whatever.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, but I think the idea of, like, really loving the glitz and glam of that is sort of... There's, like, a sort of adjacent and overlapping interest in the beauty and the captivation. Like, making a series of art about possessing the appearance of a woman. Like, these are not masculine perspectives, which might have been why they were not respected, and why even now, like, it's much more common now, but it's still considered kind of the ditzy thing to, like, love Trisha Paytas, you know, or to be Trisha Paytas. Like, she has the same kind of perspective, I think.
Yeah.
Of, like, yeah, this obsession with fame. I think there's something kind of feminine about it, and I wonder if the fact that he wasn't closeted and was in this very hyper masculine homophobic era, maybe that contributed to it, because it kind of forced him to be honest about what he wanted to make. Like, there was no pretense, which luckily worked out very well for him. But
yeah. Okay.
No thoughts on that?
No. Your thoughts are... I'm sorry.
It's okay.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're adding on top of what, you know... What? I feel awkward. I have to focus on reading it and stuff, and telling you the stuff so you can make these wonderful points.
Okay.
What are you supposed to make really cool points to if I don't tell you the script?
That's true.
I'm sorry. I'm preoccupied.
Why are you preoccupied?
And I'm listening to you, though. I love you. I'm sorry.
I love you too.
I'm really stressed. I want this all to be perfect, okay?
It is perfect. You're doing a really good job.
And
Look at all these pages we already got through.
So were you. You're doing an even better job.
Not true.
Yeah, but you're saying all this really cool stuff and you didn't do any research. So that's saying something about you, you know?
You're okay. It's all good.
All right.
Take a deep breath. Do you want a piece of sandwich?
No, I'm good.
Why are you so stressed out right now? It's okay.
Because don't worry about it. We're feeding off each other right now, okay?
Okay.
We need to break the tether of anxiety to each other.
Just read the next part.
Okay, I'm sorry. As demand for Andy's work grew, he outgrew his home studio, no longer could handle his workflow. He moved into the third floor of an old firehouse, and he brought on a new assistant to help him print and paint, a 20-year-old college student from the Bronx named Gerard Malanga. He's not really an important character, but he is present for pretty much the rest of Andy's career.
Wow.
You can see him in old footage with Malanga and Warhol printing together on massive canvases with these fucking huge screens. One thing that surprised me in this deep dive is that Warhol's reputation is that he's an overseer who directed other people to make his art, but it's largely untrue. He was a real studio artist, you know, getting in there, painting, drawing, and printing. He was like actually like moving a fucking giant squeegee and working. Like he was a printmaker and doing these silk screens. Of course, there were many years where he had other people silk screening for him, but that was in his later years. While he was still young and in his 30s, he was in the studio with his sleeves rolled up. Yeah. Doing this shit. So
I wonder too if the comparisons to like the truck coming off the Ford assembly line and the idea of it being very American, I wonder if the idea of having like an assembly style studio kind of was not like, now I feel like it's a little bit more looked down upon to not do it yourself, but maybe then it kind of added to his reputation. Like, it was part of the glitz, you know?
That's such a big thing when you're talking about the reputation of Andy contributing to like the things that people said to him, whether that were untrue, they were trying to make him seem worth more and better. But the things that people said about him that weren't true to hype him up made people hate him.
Yeah. Because at the time, owning a factory or like American-made cars, like factory production, like now we hear that, we picture people being paid like unfair wages and like passing out on like Amazon assembly lines.
Yeah, like dying in like a pile of piss bottles because they couldn't take bathroom breaks.
Yeah, like managing a factory is not a good look.
It's not cool. Yeah.
But then maybe it was. Maybe that was like American-made, like, I don't know.
I guess it depends what circles you're in. I mean, maybe if you were in a group of uber rich, you know, people at some like fancy club in Beacon Hill or something, and you like owned a fucking warehouse, making fucking cabinets to sell all over the world, maybe they'd think you were cool.
Well, maybe cabinet making is not what I mean.
I don't know. Never mind. Anyway. But yeah, after the celebrity series, wait. Oh yeah, after the few celebrity series he was doing of Marilyn and Liz Taylor and the like, he started a new series of paintings that were massively less popular called the Death Paintings, which were a series.
I've seen one of these.
They're pretty fucking weird, honestly.
I like them.
It's a weird blip in Warhol's career, but they were car crash photos, crime scene photos, and many other examples of disasters with dead bodies and debris. once again fed to him by the one, the only Henry Geldzahler. At one time, these pictures were heavily featured in tabloid newspapers. The work commented on the fact that death and blood was constantly everywhere. Geldzahler really pushed for these to be made in a desire to get Andy to explore something more serious. Andy felt like these paintings brought life and attention to the people society avoided. At first, people hated the death paintings and galleries did not want to show them. Despite the unpopularity of these paintings, people were still fascinated by Andy. What I think is really weird about these paintings is that this is like a really good example of the fact that Andy was not really piloting his own career. Like he was just letting other people come up with stuff for him and the reason they were such a blip is because Andy didn't make you think of those things.
Yeah.
He made you think of the opposite of those things. But you can kind of see the push and pull between the people giving him ideas and what he was kind of leaning towards. Because, like, this guy who's, like, a serious writer and curator is like, oh, you should look at death and this and the people don't care about. And Andy did it, and it just didn't really work out, and that was that.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like throughout all of this, maybe a little bit less at this point in his career, but it seems like he had a desire to be taken seriously. So maybe more than the subject matter, it was the pitch by Geldzahler that made him feel like he maybe wanted to be taken seriously in that way more than he wanted to make these specific works.
Yeah, which is something so many new artists do, is like you want to make things that are serious, that people are like, oh yeah, you're like, that was a smart thing to make art about, or like that was a cool, that's a common occurrence for sure.
Maybe that isn't the case, but it's interesting because I like thinking about, even if somebody does take ideas from other people, like they're being filtered through the lens of that artist, right? So it's sort of their curation of concepts, like what they're drawn to. In the same way that like a teenager on Pinterest, like if you look at everything that they've pinned, you can still see their voice in that. So it's interesting when someone has something that's such an outlier like that it makes you wonder why he was attracted to this concept.
Yeah, and also in contrast to that, like this next part I'm going to read, really, like compared to that, shows what Andy's true element really was. Another piece Andy made in this time was for a famous art collector and socialite. Her name was Ethel Skull, and the piece was called Ethel Skull 36 Times. It was one piece with 36 pictures featured in a huge grid on a canvas, all of her making different expressions. She wanted professional headshots taken, but Andy convinced her otherwise, not to go to a professional photographer, but to let him do it. And instead, he brought her to a photo booth. And he put Ethel in the photo booth with a jar of $100 in quarters, and basically just kept putting quarters into the machines over and over again, and she would go from machine to machine. As one ended, she got in another. And out of the 100 photographs they got of little reels that came out of the booths, Andy selected 36 of them, enlarged them, and then screen printed each one. And the piece ended up being so huge that they had to assemble it in Ethel's living room to mount it on her wall. And honestly, iconic of her to put this in her own living room.
That's pretty sick. That would be so fun to do.
And the piece is fucking sick. Like, where it's just all these, like, really cool black and white photos of her just in a photo booth doing, like, crazy stuff. And each canvas is, like, 3 feet by 3 feet. Like, it was a monumental, giant fucking piece.
Yeah.
All with her face in this huge grid. And they're all screen printed in black and white. So it's like... And, like, we're seeing, like, Andy's love of repetition. Andy's love of, like, just a beautiful girl up on a screen. Andy's love of making people feel excited.
Yeah.
And feeling themselves and getting them in front of a camera and making them a star. This was his element.
Yeah.
Not fucking the death paintings or whatever the fuck. This piece was a big breakthrough because it allowed him to explore seriality and repetition, as I just got ahead of myself for saying, but in a more nuanced way. Rather than repeating the same image over and over again, like the Marilyn piece, he was able to achieve a more interesting effect with 36 photos of the same subject, but with different expressions in each one. It's as if he made the Marilyn piece with Marilyn making a different face in each. People fell in love with this vibe, and it was as it was almost a static montage.
You know what's really interesting, though, about all of these works when you're thinking about themes that connect them? Like, he was making paintings of celebrities and doing works that were like about glitz and glam, but there is a sort of maybe not sad undertone to all of it, but the idea behind it and what he was trying to convey, based on the quotes that you have here, is there is a sort of like melancholy to it. Like the idea of trying to possess Marilyn, or like doing portraits of Elizabeth Taylor in the downswing of her career, like during a mental health crisis, or like, I think it seems like he was trying to, even with these larger than life figures, identify that personhood and that like humanity in these people and kind of create that connection. Even with the soup paintings, like that being something that was nostalgic and recognizable to many people. It isn't like a highbrow food. Like it's something you could buy at a corner store.
Yeah, for like 30 cents at the time.
Yeah, I feel like if you kind of think about it that way, maybe the death paintings didn't fit because it wasn't communicating the message as well as it could have, because it wasn't his original idea. But maybe there is that kind of like attempt at pulling the humanity out of, or like making the viewer empathize with the subject matter or connect to the subject matter in all of the work.
Yeah, and to talk about the death paintings, I feel like the reason that it doesn't jive is probably because the description of it in the artist statement, I would guess, wasn't even written by Andy. It was probably written by Geldzahler, whose idea it was that convinced Andy to do it. Andy, famously a man of few words, not liking to talk or explain himself. You really think he wrote up that artist statement about wanting to see the people society doesn't see? I think the only thing that unifies the death paintings with the celebrity paintings is Andy's love of voyeurism. Loving to look at something loving to see something naked.
Yeah.
Not like, I mean, like in some sexual way of looking at a naked person, but like loving to see something bare. Yeah. That's what Andy liked as well.
Which is interesting to when you're talking about how it was so strange that he came up during this time of like gritty writing and like hyper masculine, like brutalism kind of in like, writing and music. That's kind of a similar thing of like seeing something for what it is, you know?
Yeah, maybe the death paintings was just like Andy's like tough guy era. Like maybe he wanted to be kind of tough too.
It'd be interesting to see what span of time he created those in, because maybe it was just like one or like a couple months of studio sessions. He was just like, eh.
It was a bit of a blip.
We all have blips.
Because they're cool paintings, and I think there was even one in MFA Boston for a while, the electric chair screen print thing.
Yeah, that's the one I've seen.
Yeah, like they're cool, and people like them now, but they didn't really vibe at the time. But yeah, as you can see from the Ethel Skull 36 Times famous piece, Andy clearly had some kind of inclination to movies and film, and he became increasingly fascinated with this. He eventually bought a secondhand movie camera and started making his very first avant-garde films. One being a ridiculously long video, close-up of a man's face sleeping. That was the kind of thing he did at the time. Soon after, this is kind of the seeds of what was to come. Soon after, Bloom invited him back to California for another show. This time he displayed Elvis paintings with the Liz Taylor paintings. Did the famous Elvis painting of him in like the kind of Western cowboy suit pointing a gun. Yeah. That one. Anyway, but Andy, in a funny story, actually shipped all of the paintings as one giant long roll of canvas and instructed gallerist Bloom to just cut them up and stretch them himself. So.
It's bold.
But yeah, people also in California didn't like this show. It also was a failure. But yeah, when Andy was in Hollywood for the opening, he linked up with a few underground actors in the area to film a silent film version of Tarzan. So Andy is kind of moonlighting as a filmmaker now and just making some dumb shit.
Nice.
So he just made a Tarzan adaptation. With some, basically what I think is people always ascribe these like really, Andy was like really like getting to some intellectual philosophy. Andy liked to film hot shirtless guys. I think that's literally all it is. He liked hot guys, he liked being important, and he was hanging out with actors. Anyway.
Right on.
So, these actors threw a star-studded party for him. The party was packed with the biggest celebrities of the day, and Andy was the center of attention. Andy later wrote that this was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him. This party and the trip to LA changed Andy forever, and he returned to New York inspired by LA and the New York underground film scene, determined not just to be a star, but to be the head of his very own film studio. So, what the fuck?
There's a dog.
Oh, someone's yelling at a dog. I'm so out of breath. This is so anxiety-inducing. Another famous story from this time is the meeting of Yayoi Kusama and Andy Warhol.
Yayoi.
How did you say it?
Yayoi.
Yayoi?
Yayoi Kusama.
Okay. I'll do my best. Kusama says in interviews that Andy was her friend and rival. As a woman and a Japanese-American artist, Kusama struggled deeply to find commercial success and gallery representation for her work. She eventually had a show at the Gertrude Stein Gallery called Aggregation, 1000 Boat Show, famous show by early Kusama, where she featured wallpaper of a large repeated boat design that was like a phallic image that was a picture of a boat. It's kind of hard to describe without showing it. Andy actually attended the show and congratulated Kusama, complimenting the wallpaper specifically. A few years later, Andy had a show at a different gallery where he wallpapered the place with repeated images of cows. This is one of many incidents artist Kusama mentions as incidents of her peers ripping off her ideas and not giving her any credit. This was worth mentioning out of respect to Kusama, because we love her as an artist, but this subject would be better explored on an episode specifically about Kusama herself. To emphasize again, the two were contemporaries. They knew each other. They worked in similar mediums and on similar themes. On the topic of Andy copying other artists, he did so openly all of the time with his portraits, his death series, his pop culture images, replicas, and appropriations of major brands. He was sued for copyright infringement by an artist named Lynn Goldstein. I think his estate was sued by her.
Lynn Goldsmith?
Goldsmith, yes. Over unauthorized use of a photo of Prince.
Oh, yeah.
That was a famous case.
That only very recently became settled, right?
It did, and she won, or her estate won, whatever. But
that was like 60 years ago.
Yeah, the Andy Warhol Foundation says to this day they are very often sued for copyright infringement because of Andy's work. It's a regular thing, repelling these lawsuits. Some pieces even refer to Kusama. Some writings even refer to Kusama and Warhol as being some even refer to Kusama as Andy's biggest competitor. Both were operating in the same area at the same time with similar interests and
similar audiences.
Yeah, with similar audiences, and they were even the same age, actually, Kusama being about a year older.
Oh.
Experts say Kusama became increasingly paranoid about male artists ripping her off after her contemporaries, Klaus or Claes Oldenburg, stole her flow with a show of soft sculptures directly related to her own, and another artist, a man named Lucas Samaras, who made a replica, basically a replica, of her mirror infinity rooms, both artists receiving more attention and accolades than her. With Andy's cow print wallpaper show at a gallery receiving rave reviews, it was hard to believe that he didn't do the same thing.
Yeah.
Because these other two guys completely ripped her off. In the mirror guy, the guy who made an infinity room mirror, Kusama went to that opening and watched this guy get all these accolades and praise. And that guy's wife was there and apologized to Kusama on his behalf.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like, we're so sorry. Like,
oh, shit.
I don't know what to tell you. Sorry.
Sorry.
I can pay you in blocks.
Jesus, that's awful.
Yeah. So, Kusama, unfortunately, after all of this hardship, attempted suicide by leaping from her New York apartment window in 1965. Of course, as I said before, all of these themes and stories would be a lot better explored with an episode dedicated to Kusama herself. But, Kusama is such a huge fucking titan of the contemporary art world right now, and it is true. Andy Warhol and Kusama's origins are very much similar. They came from a similar place in New York City. Kusama also did a bunch of very gay art, like painting naked people and very exciting new contemporary stuff that was very cutting edge. So it's worth mentioning just because she's dope and very important. And, no, I don't think anybody from Andy Warhol's world ever commented on the allegations that he ripped off Kusama's wallpaper thing.
Well, another thing, too, to remember is that she was Asian American. She was an immigrant to the U.S., and she was a young woman, and she was making work that was exploring sexuality and trauma. And I think the cards were sort of stacked against her anyway.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, I understand that Warhol was gay, but he had a lot of privileges that she didn't have access to in a very, like, abrasive society.
He had the superpower of being a white guy in the 1960s.
Who was also, like, super wealthy.
Super wealthy, yeah.
And super connected.
Because of his sick corporate job.
Yeah. So he basically got to shit all over her and she couldn't do anything about it.
So, but the thing is, too, is that, like, I'm not saying Andy Warhol didn't rip her off. And I'm not saying, like, but it's like these other two guys really directly and openly
admitted it,
ripped her off.
Yeah.
And then directly after, her biggest rival basically
did the same thing.
Did the same thing. But I think it's important, though, that if you consider something that I am also considering, not defending Andy or dismissing Kusama's hardship either, but this idea of repetitive imagery and installation and pop art, and this was the moment too. So I'm kind of thinking, I don't know.
Have you seen the pieces side by side?
Yeah, they're the same. They're very much the same. But
I think he very much did that. I think also, this isn't to excuse him, but it's to contextualize it a little bit. That seems to be his MO. Like, I think it was unfortunate that he had enough access to her work at all to see it, because he seems like someone who just rips off whatever he finds interesting, which was trendy and he was being rewarded for at the time. Yeah. So I think that Kusama was in a vulnerable position in the fact that she was easily ripped off by other artists because she was so visible, because she was so successful, and because she was at a disadvantage by not being like a rich white man from the US.
Right.
So yeah, I think we should do an episode about her. Maybe I'll write a script about Kusama.
Maybe I will first.
Maybe I will first.
Maybe I'll rip off your script.
Maybe I already wrote one.
Maybe I'll copy it and pretend like I wrote it. Anyway. But yeah, like we said, we're not like trying to just like shit all over or forget about Kusama. I just mentioned that because, for posterity. Mm-hmm. Moving on. 1963, Andy once again surfed a tidal wave of cultural change when President John F. Kennedy was shot to death in his face and skull.
Oh my God. Maybe don't say that.
Sorry. It's JFK. What the I don't know. What, am I going to offend the JFK community? Is the JFK community just America?
Yeah, probably.
I'm sorry. I just want to make a public apology to all the presidents out there.
No, I just mean don't say super graphic shit with no warning.
Okay. They say Andy watched it on the news and
an hour.
And after it happened, he sat there on the floor crying. One friend recalled that Andy cried, saying, "I don't know what it means," over and over again. Oh. He went on to make a series of silkscreen paintings of Jackie Kennedy at her husband's funeral, venerating her pain and strength in the face of national tragedy. But yeah, I also think that's important to note, not to stop at literally every fucking single point and talk for 10 minutes. But he didn't paint JFK.
Yeah.
The tough guy, literary masculine artist thing to do would be to paint JFK dying bloodily, but instead he painted Jackie at her husband's funeral. So
that is interesting. It seems like a lot of the major portraiture that he did was women, women that were in pain, which is kind of a weird thing to bring up right after talking about how he directly contributed to Yayoi Kusama's suicide attempt. But
yeah,
they're also all white women.
I definitely think that's a controversial thing with the Kusama stuff, and it's like kind of a little bit murky, but whatever. I don't know. One thing to consider about the celebrity images is he wasn't creating something banal, corporate, or sterile. He was taking something that was already that and then making it into something artistic. I think it's interesting to consider the anti-joke or anti-comedy, kind of like a Tim Heidecker or like, why did the chicken cross the road? Because it did, or whatever the fuck. Anyway, ignore those 2 bullet points, so I'm not even going to read those. It's not clear exactly what happened to Andy in this next period, but it is clear what changed him. Andy went from an awkward little boy to a corporate professional, then from a corporate professional to a scrappy new artist, then from a scrappy new artist to a legend. But what he became after was a surprise to everybody. Andy left his Firehouse art studio and opened up what we know today as the Silver Factory, a legendary art scene that would not only produce epic parties, avant-garde films, and create some of the most iconic underground stars of the 1960s, but it would also produce horrible chaos, rampant drug use, and even death. The Silver Factory would become Andy's very own Tower of Babel. So, we are officially entering the point of the story that is we're gonna hold his feet to the fire a little bit and talk about a lot of the really bad stuff that happened.
So how old is Andy now?
I believe by the time the Silver Factory happened, he was in his late 30s.
Okay.
He was born in 1928. So if you want to do some quick math, I don't fucking know.
What year is Silver Factory?
I think it's 64. 63, 64. Yeah, I know. I don't know how to do it either.
28, 64.
All right, we're breaking out the calculator.
36.
So yeah, he's like in his mid-30s. So he's still a young guy. He's a fully intact brain adult.
There's a lot of money, a lot of influence.
Oh yeah, he's fucking rich. He's got crazy ass connections, and everybody thinks he's God.
He could basically make whatever art he wants, hang out with whoever he wants.
Yeah, Andy is he's up there with the best of them.
The way context for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Andy is. We are very, very, very far from the awkward, meek guy working in offices that nobody likes anymore.
Yeah.
We're talking about he's a demigod status now. The way I see Andy's transition into the Silver Factory era is quite simple. It's the story of a nerd becoming the cool kid. It's the story of a young, insecure guy with no romantic prospects suddenly having a choice of any lover and the entire world by the balls. He was a hopeless, romantic, forever alone gay, living with his mother, making art, and crying while laying on a bed of money. Then within 5 years, he was photographing celebrities in clubs, doing drugs with drag queens and movie stars, his art's being collected by the richest of the rich, and all of his rivals fell by the wayside, irrelevant and in his shadow. I think Andy got hit with this magic and power like a gunshot, and it made him lose his mind and made him lose his sense of self. A little bit of foreshadowing there. Andy went on working in offices, probably getting shit on by art directors and ad men and corporate clients, getting rejected by galleries and laughed at by his fellow artists, to having infinite money, power, clout, and intimate attention from any guy on the planet. Andy could say jump and New York City would jump. Who among us would handle that power responsibly?
I also am interested by, like, something that isn't really plotted in this timeline is when and how his drug use came into play.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're going to get in deep on that.
That's probably a part of it.
Yeah, that's an argument that I, too, am going to make. Another thing to consider, many see Andy as being hyper attracted to chaotic people, drug addicts, and strangely charismatic random people for his artistic purposes. They say he loved crazy people, and so he filmed them. But I feel like that reading is only supported by conjecture. I sometimes wonder if his fascination with insane people was because he was probably also insane. Also, a lot of biographers and art historians seem to glaze over the fact that Andy did drugs. No one ever really says when he started or when it got bad, but people act like this guy was of sound mind and body, chasing around drug addicts and bipolar drag queens for intellectual reasons. I have yet to see anyone suggest the possibility that Andy was filming these people and partying with these people because he was one of these people. And I think the reproach that this behavior inspired is partly due to the cartoonish genius status that people give him post-mortem. He's responsible because he threw the party and he bought the booze. And I think that's it. Andy is famous for his ice-cold demeanor and his propensity to be completely silent in social settings. Like, people would talk to him and he wouldn't even look at them or respond. Yeah. And people thought he was a piece of shit. This gave him the reputation of being mysterious and cool, but today we might read someone like that as being neurodivergent. This guy was anyway, about the Silver Factory.
That is interesting too, because I wonder also if the fact that I don't want to spoil by like asking you the exact year that he died, but I think that maybe it's just interesting to see somebody who, although he synthesized this stuff and his like technical approach is really interesting, most of the ideas or concepts he was exploring were pre-existing. Like, he was as close to ready-made art as you can get when you're making the art yourself. Yeah. So the fact that the people that he was hanging out with are described as like crazy, insane, like drug users, like just people that were like off the chain, and he was the genius because he sought them out rather than them being interesting individuals on his own that he curated the attention of. That is interesting. And maybe the fact that his reputation as somebody that did frequently use drugs was spared is because the idea of somebody who is a drug addict and neurodivergent being also someone of worth might not have been trendy at the time, or an okay thing to say.
And because these people are protecting the worth of his paintings.
That's the, yeah.
Post-mortem.
Yeah. Like, to the idea that he could have been just, like, on drugs all the time and just hanging out in queer artistic circles might have been unacceptable.
Yeah, and it was. It definitely was. About the Silver Factory, because we're going to get into everything you just said, too. We're going to touch on literally every part of that. But we're going to learn about some background and some of the cast of characters we got here. But the Silver Factory was a multi-floor, large warehouse in the middle of New York City. In 1964, Andy hired a man named Billy Name to cover all of the walls with tinfoil and outfitted the space with brand new furniture and lighting and this and that to build accommodations for as many guests. It took Billy 4 months to complete the project. He even rewired the whole place and installed the new lighting system. Billy worked day and night on the space, and by the time it opened, he became its full-time manager, its custodian, and the gatekeeper of the space. Now, keep in mind, Billy is like in his 30s. He's like this like hip young New York City art guy.
With many talents, apparently.
Yeah, he's a working class guy.
Construction. He can do electricity. He can do drywall. He's like got it all.
Yeah.
One-man team.
It really was, pretty much.
That's crazy.
For the next 5 years, Billy slept in a little loft space tucked away in the back of the factory. He spent his days mingling with the eccentric characters of the space, assisting Andy in his day-to-day activities, all the while using methamphetamine and speed. Many believe Billy was responsible for the chaotic criminal vibe of the factory scene. Billy himself admits in present day that this was true. He says Andy trusted him to control any situation that he allowed to happen and trusted Billy to bring cool and interesting people to the space. Today, Billy is remembered as being the Pied Piper that brought the speed freaks, homeless people, and meth heads to the Silver Factory, and also a group of people that historians of Andy Warhol called the Mole People.
Oh.
I don't know what Mole People means.
I've heard that term before. Want me to do a quick
I think it's like some kind of 1960s lingo for like creepy drug addicts.
Okay.
But basically, Billy Name is a really important figure in this whole scene because he was like the bouncer, the man. Like he was like this Pontius Pilate, you know, you stay, you go guy.
Yeah.
And, you know, he'd bounce you or he'd let you in or like whatever. Do you want me to keep going or did you find out what Mole People means?
I have really bad service right now, so we're in the woods.
We'll figure it out later. Juxtaposed with the fucked up crowd, anyone who was coming through New York had to make a stop at the Silver Factory. Famous artists, musicians, bands, and the like, this was the place to be seen, to do business, to drop acid, or to star in one of Andy's underground films. As we remember, he's now moonlighting as a filmmaker from Hollywood. It was Andy's studio, and it was the center of his world. It was the perfect time to think silver, Andy said. Silver was the future. It was spicy. Astronauts wore silver suits, and their equipment was silver too. And silver also was the past, the silver screen. Hollywood actresses photographed on silver sets. And maybe more than anything else, silver was narcissism. Mirrors were backed with silver.
So, quick side note.
Yeah.
Mole people, according to this, are homeless people living under large cities and abandoned subway, railroad, flood, and sewage tunnels. And apparently there were a lot of them in New York City, especially during the 1980s.
Wow, okay.
I don't know if that's what it means, if they're actually talking about the mole people, or if that was a derogatory term to mean, like
yeah,
creeps.
Homeless people, right. It could have been.
Okay. Kind of interesting.
Update me later.
Okay.
Do you want me to tell you about prominent factory attendees?
Yeah.
And people that hung out there all the time? Are you still Googling Mole People?
Yeah, I just found out that the Mole People was a nickname for the group of people associated with Billy Name who did speed.
Oh, okay, cool.
So
we have our answer literally.
Yeah, they just were calling them like sewer people, I guess.
Gotcha.
But maybe some of them lived in the sewer. Apparently that's also a thing.
Yeah. Prominent factory attendees included Robert Olivo, who is famously known as the moniker Undine. Who was an actor and a regular star in Warhol's films. Undine was known as one of the most diabolical and scary of the factory stars. He was one of the loudest and held influence over the others. Freddie Herco, a dancer and drug user who desperately wanted to be a star. Bridget Berlin, a rich socialite, child of millionaires rebelling against her parents. Candy Darling, a trans woman and legendary underground film actress who would tragically die from lymphoma at the age of 29.
Wow.
Rotten Rita, a drag queen and alleged speed dealer known as the Mayor, because according to Bridget Berlin, Rita screwed everyone in town. Rotten Rita worked at a fabric store by day and lived the life of a factory star by night. She was also an amateur opera singer. Close with members of the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed says he once came home to his apartment door half off the hinges with a poem written by Rita carved into the door.
Wow.
Also, Holly Woodlawn, a trans woman and self-styled hustler who was well known in the underground film scene. She is said to be one of the first people to say cunt in a real movie. Kind of interesting. Holly went on to have a fairly significant acting career, as she is said to have once been considered for an Academy nomination. She wasn't nominated, but she was considered for one.
They thought about it.
Woodlawn lived a fairly normal life before dying in 2015 from cancer.
Wow.
So she lived a long time. Good for her.
Yeah.
People say the factory was almost entirely working class queer people and uber rich socialites, so it was a very odd pairing, yes, but one that created a kind of cultural exchange. The drag queens and queer people are known today as eccentric characters and crazy people, but they were actually aspiring artists, actors, and dancers. Being a drag queen at the factory was like standing on the edge of destiny and opportunity. At any moment, any one of them could be noticed by Andy, the great creator, maestro, and artist. He would put them in front of the camera, and then they would do what they loved. I'm sure he never paid them. Actually, there is evidence that he did pay some of them some money, but not really. It was not something these people were paid to do. They did it for the love of the game and because they wanted to be famous.
Which creates an interesting power dynamic.
That we will definitely explore very deeply. And unfortunately, not many of them made a massive career leap after Andy's films, but remember, these were mostly unwatchable, low-budget crap movies, and they were also silent films at this time. So they were, really not good.
Yeah.
So, but they were camp, and they were meant to be avant-garde.
This would be fun to watch.
Yeah. Unfortunately, almost none of these movies you can find online because they're almost all owned by museums.
Oh, interesting.
So a lot of these are screened at museums for special events and stuff, but they're rare.
I wonder if you could find them instead of on normal streaming services through those museums databases, though.
Yeah, I bet you could. You can find a lot of Andy Warhol's footage on YouTube, but I'm pretty sure the movies and the really niche ones are limited access. Blah, blah, blah. While the factory scene was filled with drug use and partying, biographers say Andy never touched a drug, except for something called Obitrol, a diet pill whose original 1960s formula, approved by the FDA, contained amphetamine mixed salts, one of them being the completely chill and harmless drug known as methamphetamine.
Why does he have a reputation for never touching drugs if he was doing meth?
Exactly. People don't talk about the fact that Andy Warhol was on meth. He was doing 1960s freaky diet pills with meth in them.
Was it a lot of meth, or was it the amount of cocaine in Coca-Cola?
No.
So, not a big deal, maybe?
He was taking he was taking meth pills. Andy Warhol was on speed all day, every day.
That makes sense.
Don't read my script. This is another example of the dumb way art historians talk about Andy. They say everyone at the factory did drugs except for Andy. He only did diet pills that contained meth. How obtuse are we really going to be? It makes me think that a bunch of insanely rich Warhol-ownings art historians attempted to whitewash him, but only made him look more horrible in the process, which is something I touched on earlier. When you tell me Andy Warhol was a dead sober psychopath that filmed homeless drag queens making out with each other, I would say that's a bad dude. When you tell me Andy was a neurodivergent queer artist microdosing methamphetamine making unwatchable art films with other gay people, I get that guy. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That guy makes sense. Half of these biographers talk about the fact that Andy... a lot of these people barely talk about the fact that he was gay.
Yeah.
They don't want to say that. They want to make him look like a masculine, tough guy, intellectual predecessors like the Abax people. But it's just not accurate. Not to mention, it's so widely known in the real world that the drug Obitrol was a highly addictive, mind-altering diet pill. And on their Wikipedia page for Obitrol, there's a section for abuse with literally Andy Warhol hyperlinked.
As its most famous user.
As its most famous user.
Well, the thing is, at the time, that completely makes sense. That's an interesting thing to consider for anybody that's famous like this. That they were making him palatable and purchasable to consumers of the era, which, if you're thinking about somebody that would be buying art, maybe a generational wealth person of 1960, maybe they didn't want to hear any of that shit, even though it was true.
Yeah, and not even just at the time. I'm sure it was secret then. But even, I feel like it's an 80s, 90s, and 2000s thing even.
Yeah.
People whitewashing him after the fact.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the texts that, like, things were written about him at the time were written through that lens.
Right.
Which makes the documentation of him, especially because he was known not to speak very much. I don't know if he has, like, publicly published journals or anything like that. But
he has books written.
That he wrote?
He wrote multiple books, yes.
About himself?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I'm just saying, like, nowadays I feel like we have such hyper documentation of celebrities and, like, contemporary artists that you have kind of an idea of what they're about, even if they have, like, a press package. Like, there's some of it shines through the cracks most of the time.
Right. Well, unlike those people, Andy has fucking infinite content that he made about himself and his perspective. But that shit is the least popular. The most popular information about Andy are things that art historians and what industry people say about him.
Yeah.
Not what he said about himself.
How did he self-describe as far as this stuff goes?
About, I mean, which stuff is really the question. Because, like, actually, the next part of this, like, this is actually the time where Andy's public persona as a weird, monotoned, superficial jerk started to emerge. So it was also very popular and funny at the time. Like, where these really conservative journalists and people from very conservative newspapers and magazines that were, like, these kind of, like, uptight, like, loser people would interview artists.
Yeah.
And be unbelievably disrespectful. Famous artist Basquiat had countless interviews with journalists that were just being openly racist to him.
Yeah.
You know, so, like, it was like there's famous interviews of Bob Dylan talking to interviewers where they're just asking him completely dumb, disrespectful questions, and he would just give them superficial, mean answers. So it was like it was a thing for these celebrities and literary types and artists being interviewed by these people to just be absolutely flippant and just make fun of them.
And, like, antagonistic to journalists.
Nobody liked journalists at this time.
That was a big thing with the Beatles, too, wasn't it? That people thought that they were wicked funny because they were always goofing off at journalists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. It's a real thing. And Andy Warhol actually said about himself to a journalist, if you want to get to know Andy Warhol, just look at my paintings and my films.
That's fair. It's concise.
Yeah. And even during all of the chaos and drug use, Andy somehow kept up with his innovative studio practice. In 1964, he created a massive series of wooden sculptures that resembled bulk grocery store boxes. Even the big, like the big brown, like, crates that, like, ketchup bottles would come in. The sculptures were meant to look as though they were a real box of groceries, but it was actually just a block of wood. Around the same time, Andy was asked by the World Fair of 1964 to create a mural for the fair, and he made this big 20 by 20 foot mural of wanted men that were all pictures of people from the FBI's most wanted list at the time.
Wow.
Painted the mural, and the governor of New York actually deemed it to be offensive and demanded it be removed in 24 hours. Andy then replaced it by just a big color-field painting of the color silver. Later that same year, when Andy's grocery boxes finally went on display, we get a transcript of one of Andy's most iconic interview moments. That's like a famous... you keep reading over my shoulder.
Do you want me to read the interviewer's lines?
You're spoiling my jokes.
Are you going to read the whole script?
By reading them.
Are you going to read the whole script, or do you want me to read some lines?
No, I'll read it. It's okay. It'll be faster.
Do voices, then.
No! Stop. Anyway, but this is a famous video that anybody who knows anything about Andy Warhol has probably seen. The interviewer said, a Canadian government spokesperson said your art could not be described as original sculpture. Would you agree with that? Yes, said Andy. Why do you agree? Said the interviewer. Well, because it's not original, said Andy. You have just then copied a common item, she said. Yes, says Andy. Well, why have you bothered to do that? Why not create something new? Because it's easier to do, said Andy. Well, isn't this sort of just a joke then that you're playing on the public? Said the interviewer. No, said Andy. It gives me something to do.
Huh. That's valid.
Yeah. What?
You skipped the rest of the page?
Oh, shit, I did skip the rest of the page. I turned the page way too early.
Here you go.
Thank you. Blah, 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 blah. Are these, like, terrible presentations? Is this dumb?
No, I think this is really good.
I wonder if these are like, we're going to look back on these episodes as being ones that just nobody wanted to listen to.
No, I think these are really informative.
They're just like, stop making these.
Well, I think it's really good to have context on some of the major historical players because like everybody knows about Andy Warhol, but I didn't know most of the stuff you're saying right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
How many more pages do we have?
Like 5 or 6 or 7 or 9.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You're doing a great job. We're at 2 hours.
I know. The same night of that interview. Wait, so what are we going to do? Should we stop early?
No, we could just split it up wherever makes sense.
All right. You sound like you want to stop.
No, I just wanted to be cognizant of making sure we give everything that you want to talk about enough time.
Okay, that's the whole script.
Okay, then keep going.
Okay, sorry. All right. Basically, blah, blah, blah. That same night, Andy threw the very first open to the public party of the Silver Factory, letting in anything and anyone. Attendees described the event as being the night the 60s began, even though it was already 1964. That's like shit about Andy Warhol is just so filled with just stupid blowhard magical realism that he didn't come up with. That just boomers from right now are saying about him. That I think a lot of it's just inaccurate. Anyway, these parties, this new era, and Andy's new reputation gave pause to many of his longtime supporters, causing old friends and early champions of his work to back away. Even his longtime friend Ethel Skull, who he did that beautiful photo booth portrait of him, canceled her order of one of the grocery boxes and cut ties with him.
Wait, why?
Because of Andy's degenerate, crazy behavior at the Silver Factory.
Damn.
Like, the word about the crazy shit that was happening there was getting out.
Yeah.
And people did not like it. It was creepy and a little scary. Though Andy was deeply wounded by this, he persevered, saying, "Don't think about making art. Get it done. Just get it done. Let everyone else decide if it's good or bad, whether they love it or hate it. While they're deciding, make even more art."
Good advice.
I kind of don't think that's another thing that's probably not true. So he said that when he found out that this woman cut him off.
Maybe an interviewer asked him how he felt about it.
Maybe. Anyway, for the next 5 years, Andy would double down on his insane artistic change and go full force into filmmaking. Weirdly, he would always shoot the silent films at 24 frames per second, but would screen them at 16 frames per second, which would give them a weird animated look. Another film series he did were called The Screen Tests, which are among the most famous, of which there were over 400. There were 3-minute close-up shots of a person with, no cuts, no dialogue, with them just looking into the lens. Some famous subjects included Salvador Dali, Bob Dylan, Yoko Ono, Allen Ginsberg, and even Nico from the Velvet Underground, who was a famous factory star at the time. She was at the Silver Factory from the beginning to the end, pretty much.
Interesting.
One thing that was very powerful about these pieces is that they were some of the first DIY videos that allowed the subject to look into the lens, rather than pretend they weren't being filmed. Today we are accustomed to the idea of fourth wall break or something like that, but in 1964, this was very weird. Some examples of movies that he made back then were 2 people kissing for over an hour, 1 shot, no cuts, just a close-up of 2 people making out. Another one was just Andy eating a Big Mac from McDonald's.
I've seen that.
It's a funny video. A man receiving oral sex, but only a close-up shot of his face reacting to the oral sex. And you don't know through the whole thing that he's getting head. It's just a guy getting head. Very erotic. An extended play of a man sleeping through the night, that we mentioned that before. And another one is a video of a guy eating a mushroom.
Yeah, a mushroom.
Just a mushroom.
A regular mushroom?
I don't know, actually. Eventually, Andy graduated out of his his silent film era, upgraded his equipment, and began creating narrative film with sound and dialogue. Andy, being the guy who claimed he can't have any idea of his own, brought on a man named Ronnie Tavel, one of his regulars at the factory party scene, to start writing scripts. He became the brains behind all of Warhol's wacky movies. This wave of movies are characterized by their prominent featuring of non-actors playing full speaking roles. Remember, these were party people, drag queens, rogue socialites fighting back against their rich WASP families, populating the factory, are now acting scripts written by some fucking crazy guy with Andy piloting a real Hollywood camera.
Yeah.
This gave the aspiring actors and performers featured the opportunity to be the characters that they themselves were. We know from, just life, drag queens create monikers and characters, and this is a thing. People make characters and personas and backstories. And the scripts just featured the real people.
Yeah.
Like Rotten Rita played Rotten Rita. Nico played Nico.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, these people weren't like, oh, I'm going to play the fireman. Like, they just played who they were, and half the times they didn't even read the script. They just made up their own lines.
That's another thing, too, that I find interesting about all of this is, like, when you picture, like, what was going down in a space like this, and you're like, everybody there was doing meth, and they were all, like, drug addicts and mole people, blah, blah, blah. Are they able to produce a film?
No.
Like, acting and reading lines and, like, putting it, like...
Back then, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Now, maybe, but not then.
Well, I mean, I don't even mean just in terms of, like, capacity and, like, access to Hollywood cameras and stuff like that. Like, obviously that was Warhol's influence there. But I mean in terms of, like, how, like, fucked up and degenerate and they were. Someone who's, like, completely, like, strung out on drugs in, like, a party den that's, like, a terrible, scary place to be probably isn't able to, like, memorize lines or, like...
Yeah, right.
But, like, what do you mean? I think that is right there maybe kind of an example of... Like, I'm not at all saying that drug use wasn't happening, but I think that what's coming forward is this sort of, like, villainization of people that were not maybe... Just kind of a villainization of drug use.
Yeah, it's really, really amplifying the taboo. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's the thing. When you hide the fact that they were all on drugs, you're making them look like fucking idiots. And when you focus too... I don't know.
Well, I feel like the role of Andy being like, he never touched a drug in his life makes it like he has this useful window into, like, the underground of the city because there's that dichotomy of good people and bad people in the same space. And It's the good people are the ones that are rich philosophic artists that aren't doing any drugs. They're just watching it happen. Like street photography of homeless people. Like it dehumanizes the people that are actually experiencing this when in reality it's much more gray than that. And the intellectual capacity of the people that were involved, that were doing drugs and were artists is not less than Andy's. He was just the one that had maybe more backing.
Right, and it's like these rich people pulling through. It was exciting for them to be around these wacky, crazy artist drug people. Mm-hmm. And it was exciting for the drug addicted, crazy artist people to be around these super fucking rich people.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine just being you work at a fucking deli. You're a gay person working at a deli that wants to be a singer one day.
In 1964.
In the 1960s. And then all of a sudden, some fucked up, crazy party spot in a factory shows up, owned by a rich guy, and you could just go there and hang out with, like, Jim Morrison. And, like, the owner of, like, Chevrolet or something is there also. Like, that's fucking sick.
Yeah.
Like, this was fucking awesome.
And you get an opportunity, like, it's not just partying. Like, you get an opportunity to actually make art in those spaces.
Right. That was the thing. But unfortunately, despite this, like, electric opportunity, there was a massive dark side to all this.
Which is where the maybe doing speed and meth every day is bad.
Yeah. And on this, we
not great for you.
Yeah, and on this, we get some of Andy's own words saying, "The people I love were the people like Freddie Herco, the leftovers of show business, turned down at auditions all over town. They couldn't do something more than once, but their once was better than anyone else's. They had star quality, but no star ego. They didn't know how to push themselves. They were too gifted to lead regular lives, and they were also too unsure of themselves to ever become real professionals."
Wow.
Unfortunately, this attitude and power imbalance led these people to do absolutely insane things. Many of them were destitute, on drugs, desperate for a career, maybe even homeless, so they did anything and everything to get Andy's attention.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, that was the thing, is Andy was like this just like silent, weird guy, like talked all like wispy and strange, like just some weird guy. And if you were like interesting enough or beautiful enough or crazy enough, he just like magnetized to you.
Yeah.
And you were tapped as the one. Anyway.
This is like maybe you mentioned this actually, but one of the people that was in his circle who he actually photographed and whose portrait was in Warhol's Polaroid series is Marsha P. Johnson.
Yeah, he was also, So that's the type of person that was there.
Yeah.
Right. Marsha P. Johnson, who I'm pretty sure was a homeless black trans person. She was on House, right? I don't know. Unfortunately, maybe that's offensive to me, but I don't know a lot about Marsha P. Johnson's actual biography.
There's a documentary about her on Netflix, I think, that's really good.
We'll have to watch it, or unless you already have. In October of 1964, sadly, the factory claims its first life when a favorite of Andy Warhol, who was mentioned in the quote we just discussed, aspiring actor Freddie Herco, high on speed, convinced himself that he could fly, and he leaped out of a window of the factory, falling to his death on the street below. They say he danced out of the window. Scriptwriter Ronnie Tavel broke the news to Andy, telling him of Freddie's death, and Warhol said, "Gee, isn't it too bad we weren't there to shoot it?" Jeez. Tavel was very taken aback by this and hurt, saying of the conversation in retrospect, "There's a line you don't cross, and this man did not know that line."
Wow.
So Andy's kind of in the darkness now. We're kind of in a dark era. Because of comments like this and many other awful, weird things that happened, many believed Andy was a manipulative, awful person and drunk with power. The vibes changed drastically in 1965 when deeply troubled heiress, it girl of the 1960s, Edie Sedgwick, came to New York City and onto the factory scene. She was an actress and model and became one of Andy Warhol's superstars, as they say. They say she knew how to act, she knew how to make a film, and she commanded every room she walked into. Her presence shifted the vibes of the factory scene and the films coming out of it. She came from old money in Boston and had a dark, dark family past with multiple sibling suicides and a predatory, abusive father. Wow. Warhol's assistant called her the personification of the poor little rich girl. After coming onto the scene, she became joined at the hip with Warhol and involved in all of his projects. They were frick and frack. That's my description. Tavel says that Andy saw Edie as his ticket to real Hollywood though this dream would never, ever actually come to fruition. Edie's first factory film was aptly called Poor Little Rich Girl, launching her career as an underground film star. Her second film featured her in a kitchen chatting inaudibly with a group of male co-stars. The audio of the movie was produced very poorly, so to this day you can't understand anything happening. The film ends with one of the men in the cast strangling Edie on the kitchen table for no apparent reason. Her third work with Andy is known as her best, where she laid on a bed in a dark room in her underwear with a male co-star while a disembodied voice yells personal, hostile questions at her from the darkness. Apparently, these were very cool and sick, and everybody loved them. And then I put a bunch of question marks because they sound terrible. But they were really cool. People were going fucking crazy for these. The film received rave reviews, and Edie was celebrated as the biggest underground film star in New York. But even so, her relationship with Andy began to sour. Edie says she often tried to get close to Andy on a personal level, but he was very, very unavailable. Money was also an issue as the films didn't yield any profit and the productions were funded by the sales of Andy's paintings. Edie's friends, along with Bob Dylan's right-hand man, encouraged her to leave Warhol behind.
Who is Bob Dylan's right-hand man?
I didn't write down his name, but apparently the problems with Edie were a part of a larger feud happening between Bob Dylan's people and Andy Warhol's people.
Wow.
They were feuding, and at this exact same time, Bob Dylan did one of the screen test videos. So Bob Dylan and his crew of beatnik folk singers were kind of there as rivals to the Warhol group.
Yeah.
Anyway, unfortunately, this was only the beginning of the end for the legendary Edie Sedgwick, as she descended further and further into drugs and alcohol, resulting in her death at the age of 28. Just 5 years later, like many of Warhol's superstars, Edie was hypnotized by the dream of stardom, but neutralized by the glamorous and dangerous life that went with it. I mentioned that we went into such depth on her because she is like the face of the Warhol superstars. If you look up Warhol superstars, you're going to see her picture and videos of her.
Edie Sedgwick.
Yeah, from Boston. Later that year, Andy announced his retirement from painting to pursue other ventures in film, performance, and music. To celebrate his retirement from painting, he released one silver balloon from the top of the silver factory. He left Edie Sedgwick to waste away on dope and speed. As he left Edie to waste away on dope and speed, he was introduced to his newest muse, a band called the Velvet Underground. Andy's trajectory changed radically. The parties transformed into wild performances by the Velvet Underground, with light shows and Andy's films being projected onto and around the band, all at the same time to create some crazy psychedelic multimedia art show. This part of the story I think is kind of stupid. By 1966, his wacky multimedia vibes were in full swing when he hosted something called the Exploding Plastic Inevitable at a local club. The club sold out to watch the Velvet Underground do some dumb 60s light show with Lou Reed playing, Nico singing, and even Andy's assistant dressed up in some crazy costume pretending to shoot heroin on stage with a pen. Factory crazies, Ondine and Bridget, as we heard from earlier, walked through the crowd, giving friends and acquaintances real injections of amphetamines through their clothes without their consent.
Wow.
Yeah, just fucking shooting people up with meth in the club.
Jesus.
Above the insane, fucked up crowd was Warhol on the balcony, lording over the sea of people like a satanic figure, projecting his films over the band. Blowhard Warhol photographers say this was one of the most transformative and beautiful moments of the 60s, where Andy transcended all of his artistic achievements or something like that. To me, it just sounds like a shit light show where everybody was on meth, dope, and speed and acid. I think shit like this is so dumb, but it was a fucking huge deal. And the Velvet Underground is like such a core part of the Warhol story.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're familiar with their music at all, it's all about heroin. The Velvet Underground loved heroin. Whew. After this, Andy Warhol started to work on the film The Chelsea Girls, one of his most famous pieces, an avant-garde, blah, blah, blah piece focusing on the lives of destitute femme fatales and damsels in distress living in the famed Chelsea Hotel. The film was over 3 hours long, featuring a wacky hodgepodge of random scenes, one half of the screen black and white and the other vibrant color, much, related to the original Marilyn portraits, where one half is black and white, the other's in color. Unrelated, but worth noting, another factory regular, Danny Williams, committed suicide during this time by walking out into the ocean, leaving all of his clothes on the beach, never to emerge.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. By 1967, Andy had truly gone mad with ambition. He had a do everything philosophy. He said he wanted a movie at Radio City, a show at the Winter Garden, the cover of Life magazine, a book on the bestseller list, a record on the charts, and it all seemed feasible for the first time. Andy was on top of the world and pissing off of the edge of it. While things were going great and Andy was untouchable, the chaotic, crazy flame of the factory was about to be snuffed out when a young, aspiring writer reached out to Andy asking him to read one of her scripts. You got to remember, at this part of the factory days, it was open to anybody. Any wild creature, crazy person, or ghoul could wander in and party. If the person vibed, they stayed. If no one liked them, they got bounced. As the reputation of the factory grew, more and more randos showed up, and people also constantly mailed and dropped off scripts, hoping Andy would read them and film one of them. One of the scripts was written by none other than Valerie Solanas, who people familiar with Warhol stories will know. She sent over a script called Up Your Ass. Valerie was a 30-something-year-old sex worker in the East Village and had a deeply, horribly troubled life. Through her troubles and her personal worldview, she became a true and violent hater of all men. Perhaps some of this ire was warranted, and perhaps some of it came from her delusion or whatever, but regardless, she was very violent and angry, and her famous manifesto movement was titled Scum, Society for Cutting Up Men. The only member of this movement was Valerie. Andy ended up meeting Valerie in person, perhaps because he was compelled by her bizarre nature due to his obsession with crazy people. He told Valerie that her work was so obscene that he feared she might be an undercover police officer trying to entrap him. She said, "Sure, I'm a cop. Here's my badge." And then she unzipped her pants and pointed at her vagina. Apparently that's a true story.
Who told that story? Was it Warhol?
Maybe. That's an interesting question. Witnesses say that Andy or someone on his team read the screenplay, and to appease Valerie said, "Oh yeah, sure, Val, we'll make this into a movie one day. Yeah, you got it." But apparently the script was horrible, and no one had any intention of producing it. Excuse me. Andy strung her along and kind of kept blowing her off because he didn't want to say no because he was very conflict avoidant. And they say Andy was just kind of hoping she would go away. Andy forgot about the script and ignored Valerie. During that summer, the mood of NYC radically changed due to riots and police violence from protests against the Vietnam War, oppression of people of color by the police. Even the factory managed to get more fucked up because by this time it had turned into a just total heroin den. Even Henry Goldzaller and Andy's first supporter stopped coming around as well. People say Undine and Bridget, the ones sticking people with meth needles at the show, were absolute monsters that dominated all the other weirdos that hung around. They were essentially the leaders of the other drug addicts. Even famous heroin addict Lou Reed says of it, there comes a point where you don't want to die. If you don't want to die, you've got to be hip enough to be square. Otherwise, you'll be a very hip corpse. I added that line. Tensions in the factory were rising due to regular deaths, drug use, and massive infighting among the regulars. People even had problems with Andy himself. Former associates say that everyone close with Andy would end up feeling ambivalent about him. They say you would be inspired by Andy when you met him, but then you would end up feeling used. He sucked people dry. The regulars started calling Andy Drella, a fusion of the names Dracula and Cinderella.
So maybe the criticisms that we were making at the beginning of the critique of Warhol and the Silver Factory were because it was not at its low point yet.
It was not at its low point yet.
Okay. So now things have gotten darker.
Things have gotten bad. Things are not cool anymore. As the mood darkened in the factory, Andy was getting regular phone calls from Valerie Solanas, demanding she get her script back, angry, saying that she was coming to get it. Neither Andy or his team could find the script. In her delusion, Valerie became convinced that Andy was keeping the script away from her as a way to manipulate her and trick her in the hopes that she would let go and forget about it, and then they would make the film without her and take all the credit for it. Valerie demanded $25 in compensation for the lost script. Andy refused and ended up offering her a role in one of his movies, which she took, and it was a movie called I, a Man, and people said that Valerie did a very good job, and they enjoyed the film. Kind of weird.
You should have just given her $25.
You should have given her $25, 100%.
And let her be in the movie. Fuck it.
Yeah. So
because that was something I actually read about Valerie Solanas before, and another big reason why she was so upset about that is because nowadays if you give somebody a script, you have a copy like on your Google Drive.
Right, but she made it with a typewriter probably.
It was handwritten.
It was written.
It was the only copy of her life's work, essentially.
Yeah. So.
And she also was not the most stable person.
She was not right. She was, So that summer, Valerie was evicted from her room at the Chelsea Hotel and became homeless. She became increasingly paranoid that Andy still had the script and was conspiring with her publisher, Maurice Gerodius, to steal and exploit her work. Keep in mind, not a lot of people know this, but Valerie was also had obsessive hatred for this guy, Maurice Gerodius, as well.
Well, they're the gatekeepers of success from her perspective.
Right.
Like, you have to imagine she was just evicted from a room at the Chelsea Hotel. She's a sex worker. She probably has experienced a lot of trauma considering how radicalized her perspective was. Like, very staunch misandrist, like one of the big names if you're looking up misandry.
The face of misandry.
Yeah.
If you will.
Like, this is a very traumatized person, and her ability to succeed artistically from her perspective lied in the graces of her publisher and Andy.
Yeah. And like many factory regulars, just like you said, Theo, Valerie had big dreams of getting Andy's attention and becoming a star. When the day came that Andy finally paid attention to her and said he was going to make her movie, that dream finally came to life. And when she realized that Andy was blowing her off and didn't care, she lost her fucking mind and snapped.
Yeah.
And as far as as the Silver Factory's lease at this exact time came to an end in 1968, the place was a total wreck. The tinfoil was peeling off the walls. Billy Name no longer maintained it. Billy tried to find a new space for the factory, but Warhol didn't go with him. Ended up going with an associate named Paul Morrissey, who found them a series of beautiful offices in a better building where they set up a new studio. It was a beautiful spot with white walls, oak floors, and no one in Warhol's orbit knew what the future held, but it was certain that the past was dead.
So he sort of abandoned all of the people that he was associating with before.
Right. And despite Andy leaving the Silver Factory and kicking his heroin entourage to the curb, Andy was not going to get out unscathed. The hatred he wrought and the people he manipulated would have just gone away, and he would have carried on with his life, if not for Valerie Solanas. On June 3rd, 1968, Valerie, armed with 2 automatic pistols concealed in a paper bag, went to find her publisher in his apartment, but he wasn't there. She waited 3 hours before giving up and going to her second choice, Andy Warhol. That's a fun fact about her. She wasn't going to kill Andy.
Yeah.
She was going to kill her publisher, but he wasn't home.
Yeah. Good for him.
Good for him. He would have died, definitely. Or maybe not. I don't Fuck, I lost my place. Oh, Valerie went to the studio and kept asking for Andy. Each time his people told her that he wouldn't be there and she needed to leave. Go away home, go home, Valerie, whatever. And unfortunately, they were lying because Andy was on his way to the studio. Valerie greeted Andy and his new assistant / boyfriend and followed them all the way to the elevator. She got in with them and awkwardly went up to the 6th floor studio with them silently. As they got out, Andy ignored her and went about his business while his people started to kick her out. They were just like, come on, Valerie, you gotta go home, blah, 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 like, sorry. The phone rang. The guy kicking her out went to go answer it, and Andy was called over as the phone call was for him. The guy kind of just forgot to kick out Valerie and went to do something else, so she was just left unattended in the lobby. As Andy answered the phone to speak with an actress named Viva, Valerie pointed her gun at Andy and shot once, missing him. Andy begged for his life, like, oh, please don't shoot, holy fuck. She approached him again and shot, missed again. But this time, Andy fell to the ground to take cover and pretended that he was shot, hoping that it would, I don't know.
She would leave him alone.
But Valerie knew that he wasn't shot. She walked up to him, stood over him, and shot him once at the torso, piercing 7 of his major organs, the bullet exiting his back. An art critic was there named Mario Amaya, an unlucky fellow, as he was uninvolved and just standing nearby. Valerie shot him twice, point blank. Mario was able to take cover after being hit. She then turned the gun on another of Warhol's employees, Fred, pointed the gun to his forehead. He begged for his life. She said she had to kill him. She pushed the elevator button before putting the gun back at his face. The door opened, and she just decided not to kill him. And then she got in the elevator, and she left. And, she left without shooting anyone else. I like to think that this wasn't her trying to kill Andy. I feel like this was like an early mass shooting. Like she went there and shot the place up and bounced.
Yeah.
Warhol's close friend, Billy Name, tended to him, and they waited 23 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. The stretcher wouldn't fit in the elevator, so they had to carry him down 6 flights of stairs.
Jesus.
Doctors at the hospital said there was no chance of him surviving. Luckily, bleeding out, Mario Amayo was still alive at the hospital with them. He was able to get some fancy fucking specialist that was traveling with him to work on Andy. He's quoted as saying, "You can't let him die. He's a famous artist, and he's rich." Warhol, for a few moments, actually died on the operating table, but the surgeon actually knew who Andy was and went above and beyond, cut open his chest, reached in and massaged his heart until it started beating again.
Wow.
Andy was fucking dead. He was killed by Valerie, but they really went all out trying to save him, and they did. They suspected he would die while recovering from the surgery, but somehow he pulled through. Andy Warhol's mother is said to have visited him in the hospital only to return home and to pray that Andy would pull through and go on to marry star and actress Viva. She did not understand that he was gay still. Even as he lay dying, she was hoping he would get married to a woman. Valerie turned herself into police shortly after, saying he had too much control over my life. 2 days after the shooting, RFK was shot and killed as well, and Andy watched it on the hospital TV.
Wow.
He was in the hospital 2 months before being discharged. Even then, he remained housebound for weeks. Like this terrible illness from his childhood, he spent his days bedridden, drawing, watching TV, and talking on the phone. He compared his surgery-scarred body to that of a Dior dress. If you look at photos of Andy's body after the surgery, he looks like fucking Sally from Nightmare Before Christmas. He's covered in stitch marks and scars, and he never looked the same again.
Wow.
This near-death experience happened at the peak of Andy's career. After a meteoric rise to fame, he became a monster. In that chaos, he created an army of monsters. To no one's surprise, one of the monsters tried to kill him. This moment absolutely destroyed Andy. His trust, his sense of self, and his way of life were permanently altered. He came to believe, after learning that his heart had stopped during the surgery, that God took his life and then gave him a second chance. He believed the second chance could be rescinded at any moment. So he lived in fear. Andy first appeared after the shooting at a premiere for a movie called The Midnight Cowboy, which featured many of the factory regulars in its its climatic scene. Andy spoke to a reporter that night with unusual candor. "Before I was shot, I always believed I was watching TV instead of living life. Right when I was being shot, I knew I was watching a television. Since I was shot, everything is such a dream to me. I don't know whether or not I'm really alive. Whether I died, it's sad. Life's a dream. I'm afraid of God alone, and I wasn't before."
Wow.
So it sounds like Andy is living in a cloud of trauma and shock. Valerie was a psychopath through and through, but weirdly, she was a saving grace for Andy. In many ways, if not for her attempted killing of the artist, Andy would have carried on abusing people, manipulating people, and taking everything for granted. After his near-death experience, he wasn't sure if he had a new lease on life or if he would never make it back to being the person he was before.
And he's in his late 30s at this point.
No, I think he's in his 40s by this point. He's probably more in his 40s. For the next 18 months, Andy became completely adrift. He wasn't sure if he could have a new era or if he was just beginning to imitate himself. By 1969, he started to paint again, but he didn't do anything significant for a couple of years after that. Andy started off the 60s a meek young professional trying to make his way in the world, and he ended the 60s a monster, a husk of the excited young artist he once was. Until the 70s, when a new day came. Andy returned to his roots. Around the age of 42, Andy hired on a brand new team, but went back into an old approach. He became the commercial artist he once was. I started as a commercial artist, he said, and I wanted to finish as a business artist. During the hippie era, people put down the idea of business. They said money is bad and working is bad, but making money is art and working is art, and a good business is the best art. Andy Warhol's new studio looked more like a corporate office instead of a drug den. The place was buzzing with young, ambitious professionals and a new, tangible set of projects. Despite changing out his people, he kept on Fred Hughes and Paul Morrissey, who would really turn Andy into an actual business. Fred took charge of the art and Paul was in charge of the film. They kept regular hours and nobody took drugs on the job. They saw the Silver Factory days as the worst case scenario and the enemy of their current goals. They were staying away from any meth heads, speed freaks, psychopathic actors. And even Andy came to the studio most days wearing a suit and tie. Warhol staff included, that was kind of a boring list, but his staff included arts journalists, producers, business people who understood, like, you know what I mean? Like, he populated his artists with real professionals. I mean, his studio with real professionals. You know, salespeople and whatever, you know?
Yeah, he was going more, corporate. Commercial.
He went corporate. He went commercial, you know? We're on the last 2 pages. Their first aggressive business strategy was to dip into Andy's archive of paintings, selling them at higher prices than ever. Because of the demand stirred up by Andy being shot, his prices were crazy high.
Damn.
Hughes took to work securing high-profile wealthy clients for a new series of silkscreen portraits in the style of Andy's classic Maryland works. They were called the Society portraits. Some said this was him selling out, but I see it as him rightfully cashing in and making himself useful. These portraits kept his entire staff on payroll, and they kept him in business. The idea was to institutionalize himself. He cranked out portraits of wealthy people at a healthy price and put that money into all of the other projects like film, movies, and shows, and even his fucking magazine called Interview Magazine. He made his first official comeback in 1972 with a massive portrait of communist leader of China, Mao. The image of Mao that he used was apparently one distributed in the same way they distribute the Queen of England portraits into every school, household, and office. Not to mention, Mao was considered a formidable and horrible enemy to Western whatever, so those were like pretty shocking images.
Yeah.
I don't know, not much to say about the Mao portrait series, whatever.
It was distributed, like it was used by their government?
No, I mean, like, the picture of Mao that he used was the picture of Mao. Like, you know how there's pictures of Queen Elizabeth? That's just like, oh, that's the one you put in your house. It was like George Washington.
Yeah. He did like the Obama Hope portrait, basically.
He made the Obama Hope portrait of Mao. Yeah.
Wow.
By
Controversial.
Yeah. By 1974, Andy's portrait business was going hard as fuck. He was charging $25,000 for a commission of a 40 by 40 silkscreen portrait of yourself. You know, you could just hit him up for a portrait, and many, many did. He made over $1 million in commissions from the first year alone. He did them with his Polaroid camera in a studio surrounded by lights. He gave his subject the whole star treatment. He married his 2 specialties with this project, striking silkscreen paintings and the creation of superstars. He gave them the star treatment, big, beautiful photo shoot, and made you feel sexy and fun, and then he made a beautiful portrait of you.
That's some good time.
I mean, that's like what he truly was made for, you know? Andy had a grand plan with the portraits, too. He was flexible with literally anything about them, the color, composition, whatever, but he would not budge on the fact that they had to be 40 by 40 inches. It was because he dreamt that one day he would have a show called The Portrait of Society where he could display a copy of the thousands of the portraits that he did. What was dope about this period is he truly let go of all the bullshit, the parties, the socialite garbage, and he just painted.
Yeah.
He got back to his actual purpose and made thousands of dope paintings. And it was during this period, actually, that Andy met the young artist Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Oh.
When John approached Andy while he ate at a restaurant in Soho, John used to sell little hand-drawn postcards for $1, and Warhol was happy to buy some. Basquiat's legend grew without much influence from Andy's network, and his career had been growing independently with his own connections for the last couple of years of gallerists and art dealers and such. Basquiat obviously has his own story. I might have to turn a light on for a minute.
You could start the car. It's kind of cold in here.
Yeah, it's freezing.
Just make sure it doesn't Bluetooth.
I don't even think my Bluetooth is on. Let me just double check though. Yeah, it's off anyway, so we're good.
I'm traumatized by that experience.
Keep kids off the street, shout out. Wait, did we even ever say that happened?
Yeah, we were trying to record one time and it just didn't
Yeah,
come
whatever.
through.
Fuck it. Early days. But yeah, Jean-Michel Basquiat, who was having his own budding career at the same time.
I find that interesting. I didn't realize that it wasn't overlapping with the Silver Factory time.
Oh, no.
It makes sense, considering Basquiat's story.
When the Silver Factory was in full swing, Basquiat was probably
Like
5
a
years
kid.
old.
Yeah. That makes sense,
Yeah,
actually.
so Jean-Michel met Warhol in Warhol's twilight years.
Which is probably why they had a business partnership, because he was thinking... He was more of a... I don't know what the word for it would be, but late stage, like...
He was a late stage artist.
Yeah.
Like he was a
He was a business-oriented artist.
He was a fully established guy. So Andy would later enter the studio with the young superstar artist for a collaborative painting series featuring both of their distinct styles. Unfortunately, this show actually played horribly for Basquiat and caused a wave of negative press against him.
Really?
People felt like Basquiat was coattailing off of Andy and such, and there was a lot of racist feedback against it. And because at this point, Andy was an institution and Basquiat was the new kid on the block. He was only like 25 or 26 when this happened.
Yeah.
And he was young, and he is an African-American artist, and people did not give him the same respect and reverence that Warhol got.
Again, this is another example of contemporary art criticism being just like head up ass feedback.
Head up ass dumb feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with that all being said, Basquiat obviously deserves his own episode. We're talking about Warhol. We're not trying to gloss over him, but,
Important to mention.
Yeah, and to the disapproval of many, Andy and John's relationship seemed to echo the tragic relationship Andy had with many of his former stars in the factory days. Andy was older and more mature, while the young Jean-Michel was struggling, strung out on heroin. He would go on to die from a heroin overdose at 27 years old, just 2 years after his show with Andy. I think their relationship was different than that of someone like Edie Sedgwick, because, I like to think that they had more of a mentor-protege vibe. Because people actually say Basquiat was Andy Warhol's protege.
Yeah.
Maybe Andy Warhol and Basquiat would disagree with that if they were alive, but that is kind of what the books say.
Yeah.
I like to think that Andy saw himself in John and tried to impart something good on him as he rose into his own. Some say Andy latched onto him on his way to the top, but I feel like that's kind of a dumb perspective to say that Andy was like leeching off of him and his success, because Andy had already achieved like 50 years of major success and wealth and was hardly irrelevant at the time of this collaboration anyway.
Yeah.
Andy was a fucking behemoth titan of art when Jean-Michel was getting famous independently of Andy. So I don't know how I feel about that.
It's interesting from the perspective of his earlier admissions of being someone who considered himself a vessel, like looking for and identifying new ideas and new concepts, because that was definitely what Basquiat was doing. He was making art that, like, now we see that aesthetic and we're like, we think that it's overpopulated, but that's because he did it. And
right.
He was one of the first. Like, he was trailblazing a new style. He was popularizing a perspective and voice that didn't have a place in fine arts as much before him. Like, I think that there was a lot there as far as new concepts and new ideas, which does fit into Warhol's historical character of identifying people like that. But I guess it's like whether or not that's like a super bad thing is maybe a controversial perspective, because he also is responsible for a lot of the recognition that Basquiat got. Like,
I mean, it's like kind of, I mean, it's true, but it's not true. I mean, Andy collaborating with Jean-Michel was a massive validating thing for Basquiat in the art world. But it's important to know that Basquiat would have been just fine if that didn't happen.
Yeah.
He was loaded. He was selling shitloads of paintings. He was getting massive recognition. Like, he was the artist of the 80s.
Before he had any connection to Warhol? Didn't
Yes.
you say he was doing street paintings for $1?
Yes. He was selling postcards of people.
Was that just a...
In the
thing?
dramatized version of Basquiat's life, Basquiat... So here's the thing with Basquiat. It was kind of in his rise to fame that he met Warhol. But Basquiat, was known as this graffiti artist guy. But this is once again the mischaracterization by art historians and art dealers of the time.
Yeah.
Basquiat was literary, intellectual, and well-studied on art history, on African art, on everything. That
Yeah,
he knew
definitely.
and he wasn't just a graffiti artist. He was painting canvases, and art dealers and gallerists and whatever, with their ear to the ground, were already very aware of Basquiat and trying to sell his work.
Okay.
So I'm just saying, it's important to know, I don't think Andy Warhol wasn't trying to leech off of and suck the blood out of Jean-Michel, but Jean-Michel also wasn't created by Warhol.
Yeah.
I think that's important to know.
I wasn't trying to say that his education or anything like that was because of Warhol. I didn't mean the quality of his work. I just meant in terms of access to this gate-kept institution of galleries and connections. I think that maybe that collaboration was helpful. But
Yeah. What's interesting though is that the access to these institutions with Basquiat wasn't really the question. It was actually these institutions reached through the firmament to take Basquiat.
Yeah.
The institutions saw him and tried to eat him.
Yeah.
Dark. So we should talk about Basquiat on his own episode as well.
That would be a good episode to do. Well, it's interesting because the recurring question that we're seeing, I'm going to let you finish this page in a second, but the recurring question I think is coming up is the ethics of that kind of vampiric relationship between artists, I guess. Because Warhol is one of the most famous ones for doing this, but definitely it's not limited to Warhol. Curator identifying somebody doing something new, or an artist working with a younger artist because they have new ideas they've never seen before. That in its that standalone is an innocent cultural exchange or an idea exchange of, you have something new, I find that interesting, I recognize you as a fellow creator and I want to make art with you. But when it comes to success and credit and the idea of the ownership of an idea that isn't copyrighted, it can get very sticky and contentious, and there's a lot of gray area and room for people to kind of fuck around and do things that aren't really okay, even without malintent, which it's interesting. I feel like that comes up a lot in Warhol's story.
Yeah, and one thing to consider too is that with Basquiat and Warhol's aesthetic collaboration they did, there isn't a single mark on the canvas that Andy made that is like Basquiat's style.
Yeah.
The whole point was that it was the clean, hyper stencilized graphic style of Warhol with Basquiat's expressionistic style on top of it.
Yeah.
That was the whole idea.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, and just to mention too, of Warhol's own success in 2022, and to emphasize the fact, to go back to this idea that Warhol was this fading, dying, irrelevant guy. In 2022, he broke the record for the highest ever auction price of an American artist, selling one of the Maryland paintings for $195 million.
Wow.
But I didn't know this actually, but he's actually, in terms of world records for auction prices, number 30 something. Because the highest number is a Leonardo da Vinci painting at almost $500 million.
Well, to be fair, America hasn't been around as long.
That's true. Yeah. And despite the ill reception and criticism over Andy's dealing with Basquiat's, their collaborative show would prove to be a massive highlight in the careers of both of the legendary artists.
Yeah.
A show remembered forever by fans of both Basquiat and Warhol alike, for different reasons. Like many young, desperate artists, Andy vied for fame of the highest degree, and in a truly magical story, he got all that and more. From his childhood sickbed in Pittsburgh all the way to his final days in the studio, Andy stayed true to one thing, despite all the twists, turns, and bizarre choices. He stayed true to his love of art. In February of 1907, just a year after the Basquiat show and a year before Basquiat died, Andy was brought to the hospital with gallbladder pain, where he ended up going into surgery, then dying on the operating table.
Wow.
Apparently, it was an operable problem and something that happens to a lot of people, but he ignored it for a long time, and the doctors didn't catch it because he was in a lot of pain, but he just didn't go to the doctor. I didn't really fully understand the details of this medical situation, but it caused him to lose his life. And with that being said, we'll end this presentation with a quote by Andy Warhol, saying, "Dying is the most embarrassing thing that can happen to you, because someone has got to take care of all your details. You've died, and someone's got to take care of your body, make the funeral arrangement, pick out the casket and the service, the cemetery and the clothes for you to wear, and get someone to style you and do your makeup. You'd like to help them, and most of all, you'd like to do the whole thing yourself, but you're dead, so you can't. Here, you spend your whole life trying to make enough money to take care of yourself so you won't be a bother to anyone else with your problems, and then you end up dumping the biggest problem ever into someone else's lap. It's a shame. I never understood why when you died, you didn't just vanish, and everything could just keep going the way it was. Only you just wouldn't be there." Andy Warhol.
Wow.
Do you want to pause and pee, and then perhaps reflect on our drive?
Okay.
All right. So yeah, I don't really know how much more there is to reflect on. I mean, it's like, I don't know, man. Like, I just want to say too, like, as the writer of that script and attempting to mount a defense against like a very controversial artist, like,
Yeah.
I'm not like, I don't know. I don't want to say that was like some complete defense and celebration of Andy Warhol, but it's also, I don't know if I would completely condemn him as like just some total piece of shit that sucks and that we should never think about him again. Like, I think that would be pretty dumb.
I think that there are people who were worse, probably. And
Yeah.
I think it's kind of an intent versus impact question, right? Where it's like the stuff that he did and the like just lack of empathy he had for some of the people in his network and the creation of this power imbalance, this power structure where he was like a god over people that had like no shot of any kind of artistic or creative success just because of their circumstances, like lack of funds or lack of like people taking them seriously or just being in the throes of addiction or poverty, like kind of lording over that and also being lauded as a like intellectual mastermind. That's a bad power imbalance, and that's not great.
Yeah.
But I guess what is strange about it is that it makes you wonder too, like, what was that the intention or was that the outcome from a very chaotic lifestyle? And when you say that he lived in such fear after he was shot, like, was there guilt in that too? Like, did he understand what had happened? Like, there was no drug use allowed in his studio anymore after that. Like, is this sort of a very covered up like sobriety story after the fact? Like,
Who could
I don't
say?
know.
I mean, that's another thing that's like we've talked about on the podcast before, but that's so whack about art history. That's like such a shame about art history, is that a lot of it is it's magical realism.
There's some unreliable narrative.
It's literally magical realism. Like, we're talking about motherfucking Pablo fucking Escobar. Like, people obscure hard facts. People pontificate and demigod these people. Like,
just a romanticization.
they romanticize and they make it look like this beautiful story of, like, people make these things into fucking Disney stories, because a lot of the times they are protecting the value of speculative assets that a lot of these people probably own. Like, I just find that to be so fucking lame. We don't talk about the fucking history of historical figures like that. If you went to a history museum that had shit written in it the way art museums write about artists, it would be a widely discredited museum.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, it's interesting though, because there's no, like, I feel like from the perspective of a historian, there's not a huge monetary incentive. Sometimes it's political incentive, but there's not a monetary incentive to protect the reputations of these figures. Like, it might even make them more interesting and make it more, there's more motivation to write papers about somebody, the more convoluted their character would be. But with art history, the only reason we even remember these people at all is because their art still exists, and they either played a role in creating wealth by influencing other artists who became famous, or they themselves generated wealth with their work, which means that the value of that work is kind of tied into the stories of these individuals and vice versa.
And not to mention someone like Andy Warhol, there's probably fucking hundreds of documentaries about him and infinite journalism about him during his life and after, that because there's so much of it, there's also so much inconsistencies in mysticism.
Yeah.
Right? Like, did you know that a problem I came up against while trying to figure this out is that there is there's multiple stories conflicting with no sources about how the Campbell soup can paintings were conceived of.
Oh, wow.
There's multiple origin stories that are at odds with each other.
Like multiple different people that suggested it to him or something?
Yeah, or that they say they come up with it. There's a story that he paid someone $50 for the idea. Like, there's like a whole fucking bunch of stupid shit or different... You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's inconsistencies, there's fake information, and there's a lot of people just blowing smoke up asses and trying to make people like he was the smartest man to ever be born, like he's the only artist that ever did this, or it's like, no.
Well, it's interesting too, because I mean, I don't know if outsider artist would really be a label that suits him, considering his extreme success in the
Once
art
upon
world,
a time, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think that we see these things happening with the like muddying of like the biographical details for a lot of artists that have mental illness, that have immigration, like an immigration status, like being a recent immigrant, people that are mentally ill, people that are neurodivergent, like, I mean, I guess it's everybody, but I think people that maybe don't fit into the mold of what is like culturally held in high regard for like what an artist should be at the time, that is going to be tweaked and changed by the people that are selling these artists and pitching them. Because a curator or a gallerist maybe is a better example. That person isn't just an art historian. That person is also a salesperson. You know what I mean? And I think when we look at art history and we cite the words of contemporary, like, maybe critics are a little bit of gray area between those, but there's not a lot of people that are contemporary art historians that are just completely neutral, have no motivation for how they're documenting these things. They're not tied into any kind of financial compensation. They're not covering certain people because they're being paid to by any sort of institution. Like, just a completely neutral voice that's just saying what they see. That's kind of rare. And when 60, 70 years have gone by and you're trying to uncover who this person really was, you have conflicting narratives because of that, because people have conflicting motivations for covering this person in the first place. Like, people that were there in person at the silver factory that knew him or saw him or whatever, maybe that is, like, that's a first-person account. Those vary no matter who you're talking about because of the relationship to that person. Someone who's trying to sell his artwork is going to make him sound fucking awesome. Somebody who was a critic of his art that thought that he was full of shit is probably going to say that he was a degenerate. You know what I mean? Right.
Or that he was, like, some horrible... Yeah, right. Like,
and this problem isn't isolated to Warhol, but maybe it's accentuated by how odd of a figure he was in the first place for the time and how hot he was. Like, how hot his work was.
Yeah.
That's all I was going to say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think this connects to a way bigger conversation we've been having on the podcast for like a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Which is, there's you wouldn't really know this unless you're connected to the museum world in some way or you listen to us. But there's a big, like, kind of there's a lot of change happening in the museum world right now, specifically in terms of the museum world doing museum work about how museums talk about people, like museums looking at themselves, and museums being held accountable for their writing, for their artifacts, for this and that, how they talk about things, who they talk about, what they talk about. Like, this is a big thing happening right now. And Warhol is obviously probably one of, like, the least prioritized thing. You know, we definitely don't need to, like, there's bigger battles being fought in terms of, like, museum coverage and what's important and what's not. But I think this is a symptom of it. I think people blowing him up into a fucking demigod is foolish, and saying he was the greatest intellectual pop artist in the universe is stupid. It's just stupid. Kusama existed at the same time as him. Liechtenstein existed at the same time as him.
I think that Kusama's work is more interesting than Warhol's too. With all of this said, honestly.
Sure, and you have a right to say that, and there's a case to be made that that's true. You know, sure, but I'm like, and that which supports my point. And like that, it's just like Warhol would be so much more interesting to me and to the world, I think, if people didn't pretend that he was a fucking demigod genius.
Yeah.
He was an insane, crazy guy throwing shit at the wall.
And here's
making cool art. And I think that's interesting enough.
Exactly. And I think I don't know if you would agree with this statement, but I think you would. I think that the point of defending him and defending that isn't even about him. It's about the fact that there's an issue with this kind of binary mindset of somebody that isn't sober and that is maybe neurodivergent or even is a bad person, we're going to dismiss their work because it's more complicated than that. And that's a very controversial thing to say, and I know that, but people do fucked up things when they're on drugs, and people do drugs for a lot of different reasons. And like a lot of the people that are being dismissed in this story, Andy Warhol aside, were coming out of poverty. They were sex workers, they were drag queens, they were queer, they were like, there was a lot going on. And the fact that they did meth being the biggest thing, they did meth and knew Andy Warhol were the biggest things we remember about them. But all of the history books say they were actors, they were writers, they were giving him a lot of his ideas and concepts, and they were invaluable to his career. And like, the Silver Factory wasn't a huge deal because it was just his studio where he painted. People were just coming to see him. They were going there because it was the place to be, in part because of the people that were there. So I think erasing the value of a person just because they were using drugs or they were not like conventionally normal, quote unquote, is really I don't know if ableist is the word for that, but do you know what I mean? Like, it's just fucked up and it's stupid.
What you mean. And like, not to mention, like, I feel like this is the reason that I brought up this is a bigger problem with arts writing rather than artists, is because like it's not exactly popular, but there's a book called Popism written by Andy Warhol himself that's like a kind of memoir or his own accounting of the factory days and the people that were there.
Yeah. That's
a big reason why we know so much of what happened, is because he personally wrote a book on it.
That would be really interesting
about the people. It would be. And that's something that I think is just so bizarre about Andy Warhol too, is that people's comments on him are significantly more popular than him.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what he wanted. Maybe that was his whole idea, because that's what, his whole career was a kind of abstract artistic comment on other celebrities.
Yeah.
And he became, it's almost as if he became one of his own Marilyn portraits.
Well, I think that's interesting because we see that all the time. I was kind of trying to say this earlier, but I didn't have the words. I think you just put it in a better way. That with artists that are, for some reason, considered an unreliable narrator, if they're autistic, if they're like actively on drugs, other people write their stories for them, and we dismiss their own narrative or perspective, or just don't seek it out at all. Yeah. And in the art world, sometimes that contextualized by critics or like magazines or curators or whatever, not to vilify those people because they have an important role, but that tends to be how it goes. But there's also examples like fucking Britney Spears. Like, everybody has an opinion on Britney Spears, and nobody knew anything about her until she started posting on Instagram. And the stuff that she posts now is kind of hard to decipher and a little bit unhinged sometimes, but it's from her mouth. But when we think about eras where we didn't have that direct one-to-one, like even interviews with Andy Warhol, those are edited and published by magazines or by newspapers, or edited and put on TV by people with a certain narrative. It's not just clear-cut footage most of the time. So I don't know. I think it would be really interesting to read the books that you're talking about, especially because I feel like he had a reputation for erasing these people, and it's interesting to hear that he had a book basically documenting who was there and what they were doing, that he published, that he didn't have to publish.
Yeah, right. It's very odd. Like the study like the life and career of Andy Warhol is literally a case study in the very thing that he made art about.
Yeah.
It's odd. It truly is odd. And like I don't know. I like to think that like I don't know, man. Like it's almost as if the criticism of Andy Warhol in the Factory Days is similar to the criticisms we give YouTubers right now. Where YouTubers make videos of people that don't want to be in videos or do, and they're exploiting people who want to be famous, and they start content houses and treat people like shit and do bad stuff and profit off it and make videos of it.
Yeah.
It's almost like you could say it's almost like literally he was like an influencer. He was like an influencer of today.
It's interesting
I don't know.
I mean, I guess the thing that I'm grappling with here is I feel like a lot of times the question of your original thesis question is like, is this person a bad person or were they just fucked up? And I think that the answer can be both.
Yeah.
Like you can still learn from the stories and art of bad people as long as you're keeping within the narrative that they are bad people or they did bad things. Like if you're erasing that and then saying this person is a genius, that's fucked up. And I mean, there's an argument to be made about supporting people monetarily that do fucked up things. That's a whole other debate. But just because somebody did things that are bad doesn't mean that they also, like, it's just not good for you as a person to look at people so black and white ever. Right.
Caravaggio, one of the most important Renaissance artists ever, literally stabbed the guy to death in the streets.
Pablo
Picasso, known womanizer and women abuser and misogynist. Da Vinci, it's very possible that Da Vinci had a like concubine boyfriend that was an adolescent boy or a teenage boy.
Yeah.
That's like likely that happened. Unconfirmed, but it's believed that he was in love with his young boy assistant.
Yeah.
That lived with him. Kind of some Neverland Ranch vibes.
Yeah.
You know? Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. There's some I mean, even like Yoko Ono, who is like kind of seen right now as like a kind like I don't know, a really profound story of a woman artist she is very controversial. I don't think I want to comment on that right now because I definitely want to do different or more real research on Yoko Ono, but she's a very controversial figure.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's just like let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I mean,
I think the whole idea here.
Yeah, and another thing to consider too with contemporary, or like I guess that's not contemporary anymore really, but like pop art and the last like 150 years or so of artwork in historical like Western canon, to be controversial is like the name of the game, and the line between controversial and offensive is very thin in a lot of cases. And I mean, this is a whole other debate of like separating the art from the artist or whatever, and I think that's a really complicated thing to consider, but I think there's a difference between educating yourself on the biography of and the motivations of somebody who did things that are bad and supporting them like with your chest, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think that people get so into the weeds with that with art where it's like, I don't want to study this artist or I don't want to know anything about them because they did these bad things, and that's valid, and I mean case by case it depends, but on the same token there's nothing weird or wrong to a certain point with like learning about true crime or like being really interested in people that like murdered people or did mass shootings and stuff like that. And it's like I don't even know what point I'm trying to make, but I think that you can learn from the story of anybody, and I think you should not just dismiss people because they did something bad or erase that aspect, because then you become one of those people that are inaccurately documenting the character of somebody who did something bad. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Right. Like, we don't have to get on our knees and fucking just suck fucking dick of these artists. Like, we don't have to pretend like these people are fucking Jesus figure. Like, I don't understand how I can watch an art documentary and in like the same scene there's some idiot old guy on the screen being like, this artist was the best person, blah blah, like just like pontificating and saying all this dumb shit about how this artist was the smartest, most profound, greatest thinker in the universe. And then the next scene, they're like, and then he punched his wife in the face and kidnapped their own child.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck? Like, let's not demonize them, sure. But also, let's stop, like, putting these people's whole fucking ball sack, dick, and ass in our own mouths. While I'm sorry I'm being graphic, but this is fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like, people say Notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, best rapper in the fucking world, along with Tupac. In the biopic movie about him, or however you say that word, biopic, there's a scene like that, the whole movie is like that, and then there's a scene where he beats a woman in his apartment.
Yeah.
What? Multiple scenes where he does that.
Yeah.
I just think it'd be more interesting if we explored those parts of these characters and people and stopped pretending like they are... Yes.
And also,
it's just foolish.
I have another take that's, like, controversial, and it's just my opinion, but I don't think that Andy Warhol really executed whether it was his intention or what curators said about him, I don't know, but all of the analyses of his work that you mentioned in the reporting you just did, I don't think they come across in the artwork. I've never looked at the series of prints of Marilyn Monroe and thought about how it was, like, the viewer possessing the subject. Like, that's a good analysis, but was that the intent? Because...
That's another thing about Andy. It's like, that may not have been the intent. Because there was just fucking people following him around, all of them on speed, writing all of this baloney about him and trying to sell his shit.
Yeah.
And I don't say that to discredit them, to discredit Andy. I say that as a way to save him.
Well, I also think, though, maybe it just resonates with me more, the art style, but like to bring up Yui Kusama saying that she was one of his biggest rivals, like, her art, I don't feel like is that way. Like, there's a lot more context you can get from reading what she has to say about it or reading what critics say about it, sure. But there is a sort of mood that comes through with her work where I can completely see that being her intent. You know what I mean? Like, you walk in the room and you understand the vibe of what you're seeing, even if you don't understand what it is. But I don't think that comes across with Warhol's stuff. Maybe I just don't like pop art. I don't fucking know.
It's possible that it's a taste thing, sure. Because pop art is kind of like... It's come a bit full circle where pop art was a response to an overcorrection of anti-commercialism.
Yeah.
Like, there was an anti-commercial, anti-establishment movement happening, and pop art was like, no, I actually like it, or whatever. And then eventually, post-pop art into the 80s and 90s, we see the street art movement, which is kind of it's a response to pop art and commercialism, but it also incorporates it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Where street art isn't against pop art, it's kind of the grandchild of pop art, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there's probably a lot of people that think that's stupid or maybe they disagree. But I also want to say, too, that I'm not talking about graffiti, because I also feel that graffiti and street art are different things. Anyway, that's a totally different subject for a different time. But yeah, street art, it kind of came full circle because pop art was a response to anti-commercialism, but then street art became an anti-commercial response to pop art.
Say that again?
Pop art started as a way of being like, hey, fuck you, blowhards, I actually like celebrities. Or I like comic books, I like materialism.
Yeah.
I like buying shit, okay? I like soup. I love money. You know, that's what pop art was. And then street art, the angry grandchild of pop art, was like, no, fuck you, actually. Commercialism sucks. I'm poor. I have nothing. College costs $7 million.
Yeah.
Well, even though street art is more... I feel like street art maybe deserves a little more analysis because it's more of a Gen X millennial movement than a right now movement.
Street art is also such a big umbrella term. Like, it depends on the country, city you're talking about. Like, it's kind of the
100%
medium in a way, but I know what you mean.
I think when I'm saying street art, the street art movement, I'm talking more about 90s, early 2000s. Like, the street art movement kind of started with Basquiat, even though we call Basquiat neo-expressionist.
Yeah.
But the street art, Basquiat would have been a street artist, but he died.
Yeah.
So he wasn't really there for the street art movement. But when we talk about street art, we're talking about Space Invader, Shepard Fairey, Banksy, like all of these Exit Through the Gift Shop, ICA type artists.
Yeah.
You know,
Gotcha.
that's like kind of what I think people call street art.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Ugh.
But yeah, I think it came directly, it's kind of interesting to consider even how Jeff Koons fits into all this.
Oh God. Yeah.
Who is in a sense a neo-pop artist.
A lot of people consider Jeff Koons to be the direct, like Andy Warhol walked so Jeff Koons could run.
Absolutely, yeah. I 100%. I agree.
Episode 2.
Jeff
I don't know if I
Koons.
want to do a Jeff Koons episode though.
Jeff Koons is kind of Jeff Koons is interesting because imagine if we told the entire story of Andy Warhol as we just did, but Andy Warhol was a heterosexual guy that just was fucking every girl he met.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what Jeff Koons' story is like.
That's kind of what pisses me off about Jeff Koons. It's like, okay, so this guy, this like rich straight guy that like probably does coke and just like fucks all the time, makes a bunch of art and makes a ton of money. What do you fucking do? Okay, whatever.
Great job. Fun fact, Jeff Koons used to work in the selling memberships to the MoMA when he was in college.
So he's literally a salesman.
He was a salesman, yeah.
Yeah, what a bitch.
Fuck you, Jeff Koons, bitch. I don't know.
Take.
I mean, I've watched some media, and you know, I've done a little bit of digging into Jeff Koons, and
Yeah.
I'll tentatively say he's an interesting figure. I mean, I don't know. Whatever. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah,
It's not the point of right now. It's real hot in here now, isn't it?
a little.
All right. I think this is enough coverage of this subject.
What do we do, like 3 hours?
This is over 3 hours.
Oh my God. I'm
Should-
putting a like word limit on your scripts from now on.
You know, I think that's not a bad idea. I think maybe I should cut down. I think maybe the max script limit should be about 5 or 6 pages.
Oh, well, I mean,
Because
the Cambodia episode was a decent amount of time. It was like pushing it, I think, but it was good.
Yeah,
we got into a lot.
This one was too much. I think next time we're going to slim it down a little bit.
I like the context though. It was very informative, but I did just sit through a college lecture basically.
Yeah, I
A
think
surprise college lecture.
I think we might have accidentally covered literally every single art series that Andy Warhol did consecutively.
Honestly, fuck yeah. Cite us in your intro to pop art class.
Yeah.
Cite Brian on your paper.
This is a people's history of Andy Warhol that we just did. And by that I mean some guy that Googled a bunch of shit's history of Andy Warhol.
So college.
So college
year.
baby. But yeah, I mean, as you could tell, I like Andy Warhol. I was deeply fascinated by the story, but I am a believer in being real and acknowledging that these people aren't gods or philosophers, but they're also not, you know, evil demons.
Yeah.
It's like a little bit of I feel like we need a movement of just realist art history.
Yeah.
Of just let's be real. This guy was just some idiot rich guy that did a bunch of drugs and had fun.
If you want to talk to us, we'll portray you that way.
We'll portray you that way. Anyway, all right. That's all, folks.
Nice. Good job, Brian.
Is there anything that surprised you about the subject that you would want to sign off with? Like, is there anything that you didn't know that you're like, huh?
The button snaps thing.
The button snaps thing. Andy Warhol did not have button snaps installed in his skin on his scalp.
That makes sense. Really?
He just used wig glue.
Imagine taking a wig off that has button snaps implanted in your skull. That would
Yeah, that'd be pretty bad.
It would be horrible.
Fun fact, in I think the 1980s, right at the end of Warhol's career, he was at a book signing for one of his books, and a woman came up to him and literally snatched his wig off of his head. Ripped his wig off and ran out of the venue, and I believe she didn't get caught.
What happened to the wig? Did she try to sell it?
Who knows? Andy Warhol wrote in one of his books, or in a whatever or in a journal after the fact, that he said it took everything in him not to push her off of the balcony and kill her.
Holy shit. Iconic.
Honestly, that's fucking sick, because whoever did that is probably like a 48-year-old woman with kids or something somewhere in the world.
48?
It was in like the 1980s, and I'm assuming it was a young woman.
Huh.
That was probably like, I'm guessing it was like a girl in her early 20s or something that was like, thought it would be sick to steal Andy Warhol's wig.
Wild.
And Andy Warhol died in 1987, which is not that long before we were born.
Yeah.
So
that's another really interesting thing to think about, like how short of a timeline so much of this occurred on. If we don't stop recording, I'm gonna die.
Okay, that's all, folks. Boston Art Podcast. Thank you for listening. Hope we didn't bore you to death.
Good job, Brian. Good
if you
research.
hate these episodes, sorry.
Why do you keep ignoring me telling you good job?
Because I know you like it, but I don't know if people just want to hear interviews or just want to hear us have fun and talk, or if they like learning about art history.
We just make the content we make, and they're gonna like it.
And here's the thing, people. Don't complain about art history. This is society and culture and comedy and art. You assholes. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey all, Brian here. Just wanted to hop in and thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for all that, and let you guys know that if you want to learn more or see the actual source where I got all this information, a lot of it was from random websites and old articles and shite like that. But the main crux of this thing was from a film called the Andy Warhol, a documentary film written by James Sanders and Rick Burns, featuring interviews from many of Warhol's associates and the like, and art historians. But yeah, so just wanted to support people who made it. Pretty sure it's kind of older, from 2006, but anyway, I don't know, fuck it. Hope you guys like this. More next time. Bye-bye. Oh, and here's Theo reading those disclaimers and credits. Bye.
Boston Art Podcast is an independent DIY production by Brian Huntress and Theodora Earthworms. The information contained in this episode represents the views and opinions of the original creators or our guests, and does not represent any institution, organization, or business. Find us on Instagram at Boston Art Podcast, and tune in for a new episode every Friday. Thank you for listening.